The air inside Harrison Cole's mahogany-paneled conference room smelled of old paper and expensive lemon polish. My mother leaned across the polished table, the tendons in her neck strained against her pearl necklace. "This is a clerical error." Her voice rattled the ice in the crystal water pitcher. "Fix it right now." Harrison Cole did not blink. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and folded his hands over the closed manila folder. He shifted his gaze past her and locked his eyes onto mine. "Before we begin the formal reading of the remaining assets," the attorney said, his tone remained flat and steady, "I need your apartment keys, Dulcie. You will not be returning there tonight." My father slumped in his leather chair. The color drained from his face until his skin matched the gray of his suit lapels. Beside him, my older brother Julian sat rigid. The metallic clatter of his car keys echoed in the sudden silence as he dropped them on the table. I sat at the far end of the room with my hands resting in my lap. I did not flinch. I did not ask why. To understand how a 32-year-old financial auditor ended up holding the deed to the Leawood estate her parents currently occupied, you have to rewind exactly 3 weeks. You have to go back to Thanksgiving, to the day they erased me. Before I explain how I legally dismantled my family, let me know your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to the Linda Vengeance channel if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who tried to take everything from you. My name is Dulcie Harrell, and I spent my adult life building boundaries. I work as a corporate auditor. My days consist of finding the hidden truths people bury in ledgers. I notice discrepancies. I track missing funds. I see what people try to hide. The drive to Leawood always took 30 minutes from my downtown apartment. That suburb stood as a sanctuary of manicured lawns, wrought iron gates, and silent wealth. I walked through the front door of my childhood home, carrying an overnight bag and a bottle of Pinot Noir. The scent of roasted turkey usually filled the foyer on holidays. Today, a faint underlying odor of fresh paint masked the food. "Put your things upstairs, Dulcie," Richard called from the kitchen. I climbed the oak staircase. My hand turned the brass knob of the second door on the left. I stopped in the threshold. The floral wallpaper I had picked out at age 12 was gone. A sterile corporate slate gray covered the drywall. My heavy oak canopy bed had vanished. In its place stood a glass-topped standing desk, dual monitors, and an ergonomic leather chair. A large whiteboard dominated the far wall. Red markers scrawled Julian's latest tech startup metrics across the porcelain surface. Richard paused behind me in the hallway. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel. He did not look at the room. He stared at the floorboards. "Julian needed a central command center," my father said. He shrugged his shoulders. "His investors prefer a suburban backdrop for video calls. You have your own life now. Your brother needs the space more." Sylvia appeared holding a stack of cloth napkins. She offered a tight, practiced smile. "We assumed you would not mind. You hardly ever stay the night anyway." Julian stepped out of the guest bathroom down the hall. He wore a crisp tailored shirt and a smirk that suggested he had won a prize. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror and patted his hair. I looked at the empty space where my life used to exist. "Where are my clothes, Mom?" "The basement," she said. She was already turning back toward the stairs. "We organized them." I walked down the narrow wooden steps into the unfinished storage cellar. The air down there felt stale. It carried the thick scent of damp concrete and old dust. Stacked against the cinder block wall sat 4 brittle, generic plastic bins. The lids did not fit properly over the edges. I popped the top off the nearest container. My tailored wool winter coats and soak blouses were shoved inside. They lay wrinkled against the bottom, absorbing the mildewed chill of the cold floor. I knelt there. My fingers traced the cracked plastic lip of the bin. My brain automatically shifted from daughter to auditor. I stood up and looked out the narrow basement window. Julian's vehicle sat parked in the driveway. It was a brand new Porsche Macan. The temporary dealer tag still hung taped to the windshield. I thought back to the kitchen upstairs. Richard, pouring the wine, the frayed stitching on his shirt cuffs, the past due notices I had glimpsed stacked next to the microwave. the cheap brand of butter on the counter. Julian had not launched a successful business. He had launched a sinkhole. My parents were drowning in his debt. They were cannibalizing my history to keep his illusion afloat. I did not yell. I did not demand an apology. Reactions serve as currency to narcissists. I refused to pay them a single dime. Instead, I opened my purse and pulled out my heavy red fountain pen. The brass cap clicked sharply in the quiet cellar. I withdrew a small leather ledger, flipped to a blank page, and documented the date. I wrote down the make of the Porsche. I noted the past due envelopes. I hoisted the first plastic bin into my arms. I carried it up the stairs. I walked past the dining room where Julian was already pouring himself a scotch. I took the container out to my car. I returned and did this 3 more times. Sylvia stood in the kitchen doorway holding a serving spoon, her brow furrowed in confusion. She expected a fight. She expected tears. She did not know what to do with silence. "Dinner is almost ready," she offered. Her voice wavered just a fraction. I closed the trunk of my sedan. I looked at her from the driveway. "Enjoy your command center." I drove away from the Leawood estate before the turkey was even carved. I left a silent, empty space at their table. For 3 weeks, I did not answer their calls. I focused on my work. I balanced ledgers for clients and waited for the inevitable fracture. The fracture came in the form of a summons to Harrison Cole's office for the reading of my grandmother's estate. Grandma Beatrice had passed away 2 months prior. She was a shrewd woman. She understood numbers just as well as I did. She never trusted Julian. She saw through Richard's weak spine and Sylvia's obsession with social status. Now I sat across from her attorney. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to break the glass table. Cole slid a heavy blue cardstock document across the mahogany surface. It stopped right in front of Julian. "The deed," the attorney stated. He tapped the thick paper with his index finger. "Transferred to Dulcie Harrell in its entirety 6 months ago." Julian's chair scraped against the hardwood. His hands curled into fists on his knees. My mother gasped, pulling a hand to her chest, as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. Richard stared at the blue document. His breathing grew shallow. He knew what this meant. The house was his only collateral. The safety net was gone. Julian lunged forward across the table. His hand snatched the deed. "I will tie this estate up in probate court for a decade," Julian hissed. His face flushed a deep mottled red. "You will never see a dime of this property, Dulcie. I will bleed you dry in legal fees." Harrison Cole did not raise his voice. He simply leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands. "You can certainly try, Julian," Cole replied, "but I must advise you against it." Beatrice anticipated this exact reaction. She included a specific directive in the trust. Julian paused. The paper crinkled in his grip. "A poison pill," Cole continued. "If any member of this family contests the transfer of the Leawood estate, it will trigger an automatic and immediate action against Richard. The trust holds undisclosed promissory notes. If you challenge this deed, the estate will immediately initiate aggressive collection of $1.2 million. The room went entirely still. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The grandfather clock ticked. Julian stared at Harrison Cole. The threat of $1.2 million hung in the conditioned air. Julian had a nervous habit of spinning his car keys on his index finger whenever he felt cornered. He had been doing it under the table since we sat down. That motion stopped. His hand opened. The heavy metal keychain slipped from his grasp and hit the polished hardwood floor. The sharp clatter echoed against the mahogany walls. He released the blue cardstock deed. It slid back across the table toward the attorney. Richard let out a breath that sounded like a tire losing pressure. He slumped forward, resting his elbows on his knees. My father had spent the last decade walking through the Leawood estate acting like the lord of the manor. He paid the property taxes. He hired the landscapers to trim the hedges. He funded the slate gray paint for Julian's new command center. He did all of this under the assumption that being the eldest son guaranteed his inheritance. He never bothered to check the county registry. If he had, he would have discovered Grandma Beatrice never transferred the title into his name. She placed the property into a blind trust 10 years ago. Letting Richard pay the taxes was her version of charging him rent. Cole opened his manila folder and extracted a secondary document. He adjusted his glasses and read the summarized terms aloud. Beatrice Harrell amended the trust 6 months prior to her passing, Cole stated. She removed Richard as the primary beneficiary. She designated Dulcie as the sole owner of the real property located in Leawood, Kansas. The transfer was executed outside of probate. It is legally binding and finalized. Sylvia pushed her chair back. The legs scraped harshly against the floor. Her carefully curated country club facade began to crack. For 30 years, my mother ruled her social circle through the perceived prestige of that house. She hosted charity galas in the garden. She dictated neighborhood association rules from the front porch. The realization that she was merely a tenant in the home she flaunted hit her like a physical blow. "This is unacceptable," Sylvia hissed. Her voice climbed an octave, shedding its usual refined tone. "We built our entire lives in that house. You cannot just hand it over to a 32-year-old spinster who does not even visit. We are her parents." "You are her occupants," Cole corrected evenly. "Legally speaking, you possess a month-to-month tenancy at the discretion of the new property owner." I watched them unravel. In my profession as a corporate auditor, I often sit across from executives who realize their embezzlement schemes have been uncovered. They cycle through the exact same stages of grief. First comes arrogant denial. Then comes loud indignation. Finally, the terrifying reality sets in. Richard reached the final stage before his wife did. His skin turned a pale, sickly shade of yellow. He rubbed a trembling hand over his mouth. "The collateral," Richard whispered. The words barely made it past his lips. Julian shot him a frantic warning look, but the damage was done. My mind connected the data points instantly. Julian required endless streams of capital for his failing tech startups. Banks do not lend hundreds of thousands of dollars to unemployed entrepreneurs without solid backing. Richard had co-signed the loans. He used the Leawood estate as his primary asset. He pledged a house he did not legally own to secure funding for the golden child. If the bank discovered the title belonged to me, Richard would face immediate calls on those loans. It bordered on federal bank fraud. "You planned this," Julian accused. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You went behind our backs and manipulated an old woman into signing over the deed." I picked up my red fountain pen from the table and rolled it between my fingers. The cool brass grounded me. "I have not spoken to Grandma Beatrice about her estate in 5 years, I replied. She made her own calculations. She recognized a bad investment when she saw one. "She was confused," Sylvia interrupted. Tears of genuine panic welled in her eyes. "Dulcie, please, think about what you are doing to your family. Your brother needs that space. Your father is under immense pressure. We can fix this if you just sign the property back over to us today." "If I sign it over, Julian will leverage it to zero within a year," I said. My voice held no malice. It only contained facts. "And then the bank will take it anyway." Cole cleared his throat to regain control of the room. He tapped the secondary document containing the poison pill clause. "Let me be perfectly clear regarding the promissory notes." Cole addressed Richard directly. "Over the past 7 years, Beatrice quietly loaned you funds to cover Julian's business shortfalls. You signed personal guarantees for every single transfer. She kept the receipts. The total principal and interest equals $1.2 million. The debt is currently held by the estate." Richard squeezed his eyes shut. A bead of sweat dripped down his temple. "If you accept the change in property ownership," Cole explained, "the debt remains dormant within the trust structure. However, if you or your son initiate any legal challenge regarding the deed, the trust is instructed to immediately file suit for the full $1.2 million. You will be bankrupted before you ever see the inside of a probate courtroom." Grandma Beatrice had engineered a flawless checkmate. She knew Richard and Julian possessed an insatiable greed. She also knew they lacked the discipline to fight a protracted legal battle without funds. She built a financial wall around me and handed me the only key. Julian bent down and retrieved his car keys from the floor. He refused to look at me. The arrogant smirk from Thanksgiving had vanished, leaving behind the bitter scowl of a defeated rival. He pocketed the keys and crossed his arms over his chest. "Fine," Julian muttered. "Keep the house. We will move." "Actually," Cole said. He turned his attention back to me. "There is one final stipulation in the trust directive. A property transfer of this nature requires the new owner to assume active physical possession to satisfy the insurance and liability clauses." Cole held out his open palm toward me. "Miss Harrell," Cole said, "I require your apartment keys. The trust dictates that you must relocate to the Leawood estate as your primary residence immediately. If you fail to occupy the premises, the property defaults to a charitable foundation." Sylvia gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The implications settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. I was not just taking ownership on paper. I had to physically move back into the house. I had to reclaim the space they had stripped away from me. "She cannot move in," Richard stammered. He looked at Cole with wide, desperate eyes. "Julian's equipment is set up. Our lives are there. We need time." "You have 30 days to vacate," I stated. I unzipped my purse and pulled out my apartment keychain. I detached the silver key and placed it directly into the attorney's hand. I turned my gaze to my parents. They looked small and fractured, sitting in their expensive leather chairs. "I expect my old bedroom to be cleared out by the end of the week," I told them. "You can put Julian's command center in the basement. I left some empty plastic bins down there for you." I stood up from the table. I placed my red pen back into my purse and snapped it shut. "We are done here," I said. I walked out of the conference room without waiting for a response. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside with the wreckage of their own entitlement. I walked to the elevator with my head held high. I drove straight to my apartment to gather an overnight bag. I needed to establish occupancy at the Leawood property tonight to satisfy the legal requirements. My mind raced with logistical planning. I needed to change my billing address. I needed to hire an independent appraiser to document the current condition of the estate. My phone vibrated in my center console. The caller ID flashed my younger sister Vanessa's name. She had skipped the meeting, claiming a work conflict. I ignored the call. She left a voicemail almost immediately. I pulled into my parking garage and listened to the message. Vanessa sounded frantic. She cried through the audio, begging me to reconsider and keep the peace. She pleaded for me to just let Dad have the house. The performance sounded convincing, but I heard the faint click of a recording device engaging in the background. My sister was gathering audio leverage. I deleted the message and went upstairs to pack. I intended to sleep in the guest room at the estate tonight. I arrived at the Leawood property just after sunset. The house sat dark against the twilight sky. I pulled into the driveway and put my car in park. I reached for my purse. Before I could turn off the engine, my cell phone illuminated with an urgent security notification from the estate's alarm monitoring company. Someone was attempting to forcibly breach the front door. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan with the engine idling. The glow of my phone screen illuminated the dark interior of the cabin. A glaring red notification from the estate security system pulsed across the digital display. Unauthorized entry attempt. Front door sensor. I shifted the car into park and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The grinding pitch of a high-speed drill fractured the quiet suburban neighborhood. I walked up the paved driveway toward the house. A white commercial van sat parked at a crooked angle near the manicured rose bushes. On the front porch, a man in a gray utility shirt leaned his heavy weight against the mahogany door. He pushed a long steel drill bit directly into the brass cylinder of the deadbolt. My mother stood 3 feet away from him. She wore her pristine white tennis skirt and a matching visor. She held a stainless steel travel mug of coffee. She pointed at the locking mechanism, dictating sharp instructions to the hired worker. She intended to change the locks before I could establish legal occupancy. She wanted to force a physical lockout and retain control of the property. I did not run. I did not shout her name. I walked up the brick steps with measured, purposeful strides. The harsh smell of heated metal and shaved brass drifted through the cold Kansas wind. I reached out and tapped the worker on the shoulder. He stopped the drill and turned around. He looked annoyed by the interruption. "I am the legal owner of this property," I told him. My voice remained level and calm. I unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out the heavy blue cardstock deed and my state-issued driver identification. I held both documents under the bright glow of the porch light. "The woman directing you is a tenant. If you breach that cylinder, you are participating in a felony property crime." The man wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He squinted at the certified county seal stamped onto the deed. He looked at the name on my ID. Then he turned his gaze toward my mother. His annoyance dissolved into immediate self-preservation. He pulled the drill bit out of the doorframe. Curly metal shavings fell onto the welcome mat. He did not say a single word to Sylvia. He grabbed his toolbox, snapped it shut, and hurried down the brick steps toward his van. Sylvia dropped her travel mug. Brown liquid splashed across the porch stones, staining the gray concrete. "Get back here," she demanded. Her voice cracked under the strain. "I am paying you a premium rate." The van engine roared to life. The vehicle reversed out of the driveway and sped down the street, leaving us alone on the porch. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and dialed the security monitoring company. Sylvia crossed her arms over her chest. She turned her head and refused to look at me. The operator answered on the second ring. I provided my name and the master account number Harrison Cole had transferred into my name that afternoon. I asked for a status report on the perimeter alarm. "The system is currently disarmed," the operator stated. "The primary resident updated the verbal authentication passcode approximately 1 hour ago." I watched my mother stare at the neighbor's dark yard. She had tried to lock me out digitally as well as physically. "What is the new passcode?" I asked. The operator paused, reading the screen. 081289. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. August 12th, 1989. Julian's exact birth date. My mother had not just attempted to seize control of my house. She had used my older brother's birthday as the digital shield to do it. The numerical sequence felt like a deliberate strike. It confirmed every suspicion I held since childhood. Julian represented her only true priority. I was merely the obstacle standing in his way. I thanked the operator and ended the call. I stepped past Sylvia and pushed the heavy mahogany door open. The foyer smelled of her signature cinnamon vanilla candles. It was a cloying, sweet scent designed to mask the suffocating tension that always filled these walls. I walked over to the entryway console table. I set my briefcase down on the polished wood. I reached inside and retrieved a crisp stack of pre-printed legal documents. I had drafted them in my office earlier that afternoon. I pulled out my heavy red fountain pen. I removed the brass cap. The metal clicked sharply in the quiet foyer. I signed my name at the bottom of the formal 30-day notice to vacate. The bright red ink soaked into the paper, leaving a definitive, undeniable mark. Sylvia stepped into the entryway behind me. Her tennis shoes squeaked against the hardwood floor. I turned around and held the document out to her. She refused to take it. She kept her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I placed the paper on the surface of the console table, right next to a decorative glass bowl. "The clock starts tonight," I told her. "You have 1 month to find a new residence." Heavy footsteps sounded on the oak staircase. Richard descended the steps slowly. He wore a faded bathrobe over his slacks. His shoulders slumped forward. He looked 10 years older than he had at the Thanksgiving dinner table. He stopped at the bottom step and gripped the banister. He surveyed the scene. He saw the red ink on the legal notice. He did not argue the law. He pivoted directly to emotional leverage. "Dulcie," he murmured. His voice carried a manufactured tremor. "My doctor increased my blood pressure medication last week. My heart cannot handle this kind of stress. We are your family. You are going to put your sick father out on the street over a piece of paper." I analyzed his posture. I watched the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the wooden rail. When corporate executives realize their financial frauds are exposed, they often feign illness. They clutch their chests during audits. They claim sudden medical distress to halt the investigation. Richard was running the exact same playbook. He wanted me to feel guilt. He wanted me to fold under the weight of daughterly obligation. "Your medical condition does not invalidate my property rights," I replied. My tone offered no sympathy. "If you require emergency assistance, I will gladly dial for an ambulance right now. Otherwise, the eviction notice stands as written." Richard let go of the banister. The manufactured tremor vanished from his hands instantly. His jaw tightened. The victim routine dissolved, leaving behind a cold, bitter resentment. He glared at me. As Richard opened his mouth to deliver a harsh retort, my gaze drifted back to the console table. Next to the decorative glass bowl sat a disorganized stack of Daily Mail. A familiar logo caught my eye. The official eagle seal of the Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. The thick envelope was addressed to Julian. The top flap was torn open, exposing the folded document inside. I leaned forward slightly. The bold black font at the top of the page remained clearly visible through the jagged paper opening. Notice of federal tax lien, unpaid balance due. I did not need to see the exact dollar amount to understand the gravity of the situation. As a financial auditor, I knew exactly what that specific form meant. The government does not issue those notices for minor accounting errors. They issue them when a taxpayer ignores repeated warnings and conceals significant revenue. Julian was not just losing his startup capital. He was hiding federal crimes. The Leawood estate was no longer just a family battleground. It was about to become a target for federal asset forfeiture. The harsh glow of my dual monitors provided the only illumination in my downtown apartment. I sat at my desk and traced the breadcrumbs left by that single government envelope. Julian operated under a complex corporate veil. I accessed the state business registry database. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard with practiced precision. I typed his legal name into the search bar. 0 results appeared on the screen. He was smart enough to avoid direct ownership on public ledgers. I shifted my auditing strategy. I searched the Leawood residential address. A registered entity popped up immediately, Apex Solutions Group. I pulled the initial articles of organization. The listed manager was not my brother. It was a third-party registered agent located in a generic strip mall in Delaware. I did not stop there. In corporate auditing, you follow the money until the numbers confess their sins. I cross-referenced the employer identification numbers. 3 subsidiary limited liability companies appeared. None of these businesses produced a tangible product. They held no inventory. They possessed no commercial lease agreements. They existed solely to receive and redirect capital. I downloaded the public ledger histories and exported the raw data into my own spreadsheet. Julian was not failing due to simple entrepreneurial incompetence. He was failing by design. He funneled Richard's borrowed money through the Delaware entities and vanished the funds into decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges. It was textbook money laundering. My father had mortgaged his future and his home to fund a criminal enterprise. The sharp knock on my front door broke my deep concentration. I glanced at the digital clock on my taskbar, 11:45 at night. I picked up my phone and opened the security camera application. Vanessa stood in the hallway. She clutched a dark glass bottle of Cabernet against her chest. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes in dark, chaotic streaks. My younger sister rarely visited my side of the city. In the toxic ecosystem of our family, Vanessa occupied the comfortable middle ground. She played the perpetual peacemaker. She smiled during holidays and nodded at my parents' demands and actively avoided the crossfire. She survived by remaining neutral. I unbolted the heavy deadbolt and pulled the door open. Vanessa let out a broken, ragged sob and stepped inside. She smelled of expensive floral perfume mixed with the sour tang of stale wine. "I have nowhere else to go," Vanessa whispered. She walked past me into the living room and collapsed onto the velvet sofa. She pulled a crumpled tissue from her coat pocket and dabbed at her eyes. I secured the locks and walked over to sit in the armchair opposite her. "What happened?" I asked. My tone remained guarded, but curious. Vanessa took a shaky, uneven breath. Dad called me an hour ago. He was screaming about your eviction notice. He told me the house belongs to you now. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. But that is not why I am crying, Dulcie. Julian ruined me, too. I stayed quiet. I let the silence draw her out. 3 years ago, Dad begged me to co-sign a short-term business loan for Julian, Vanessa explained. He promised it would be paid off in 6 months. He said Julian was on the verge of a lucrative software buyout. I found out yesterday that the account went into severe default. Collection agencies are calling my office line. My credit score dropped 200 points in a single week. They destroyed my financial future just to keep Julian's fake company afloat. Tears rolled down her flushed cheeks. Her shoulders shook. She looked genuinely terrified of the financial ruin looming over her. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a small hairline fracture in my defensive armor. Vanessa seemed to be the only other person on earth who truly understood the suffocating weight of our parents' blind favoritism. She reached across the glass coffee table and grasped my hand. Her fingers felt ice cold against my skin. "We have to stick together, Dulcie," she pleaded. "You are the only one who sees them for what they really are. Please tell me we are on the same side. I cannot fight them alone." I looked at her smeared makeup and her trembling frame. I wanted to believe her story. I wanted to have one actual blood relative remaining in my corner. "We are on the same side," I told her. "Let me make some tea," I offered softly. "You need to calm down before you try to drive home." Vanessa nodded and released my grasp. She sank back into the deep sofa cushions, closing her eyes. I stood up and walked into the adjoining kitchen. The layout of my apartment placed the cooking area out of direct visual line with the living room and my open home office workspace. I filled the electric kettle with filtered water and pressed the activation switch. The internal heating coil began a low, steady hum. I retrieved 2 ceramic mugs from the upper cabinet. I selected a soothing chamomile blend. The entire steeping process took perhaps 4 minutes. I poured the boiling water over the tea bags, watching the liquid turn a pale golden hue. I added a small spoonful of honey to Vanessa's mug and stirred it slowly. I returned to the living room carrying the warm drinks. Vanessa was no longer sitting on the sofa. She stood near the large bay window looking out at the glittering city skyline. She turned around quickly when I entered the room. Her posture seemed unusually rigid. The tears had stopped entirely. Her eyes appeared clear and focused. I handed her the mug. She took a quick, shallow sip and set the ceramic cup down on the glass coffee table right next to her crumpled tissue. "I should go," Vanessa announced abruptly. Her voice lacked the fragile, desperate tremor from 10 minutes prior. "I just needed to know you did not hate me. I need to get some sleep before my morning meetings." The sudden shift in her demeanor felt jarring. She did not wait for my response. She grabbed her wool coat from the arm of the sofa and walked briskly out the front door. The brass latch clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in my quiet living room, holding my cooling mug of tea. I looked down at the coffee table. The tissue she left behind caught my attention. I reached out and picked it up. The paper felt perfectly dry. The mascara smudges were drawn onto the surface like theatrical paint. It was a calculated prop. The realization hit my stomach like a heavy lead weight. I turned my head and looked down the short hallway toward my home office. The door stood wide open. I set my mug down and walked into the workspace. The glowing monitors still displayed Julian's corporate filings. I looked down at my mahogany desk surface. My pens and highlighters were arranged precisely how I left them. I crouched down and pulled open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I engaged the numerical combination lock on my fireproof safe. The heavy steel door swung open smoothly. I breathed a brief, quiet sigh of relief. The thick blue cardstock deed remained untouched on the top shelf right where I placed it earlier that evening. Vanessa had not taken the ultimate prize. I closed the safe, spun the dial, and stood back up. My eyes scanned the top of my desk a second time. A specific stack of manila folders sat near the far edge. I always align my active files flush with the leather corner of my desk pad. These folders rested at a slight crooked angle. Someone had moved them. I quickly flipped through the labeled tabs: bank statements, audit reports, previous year tax returns. I stopped on a specific heavy folder labeled Personal Archives. I flipped open the cover. The internal contents were out of their strict chronological order. I sifted through the loose papers. A cold, sharp chill ran down my spine. A very specific document was missing from the archive. It was a voided tax declaration form from 2 years ago. The document itself held no monetary value. It contained no routing numbers or sensitive account data, but it contained one vital, irreplaceable element. At the bottom of that page sat my exact official signature. It was the precise, stylized script I used exclusively for notarized legal documents and property deeds. Vanessa did not come to my apartment seeking a sisterly alliance. She did not come to drink wine and cry over ruined credit scores. She came as a thief deployed by Richard and Julian. The red herring had worked with flawless precision. I let my guard down to boil water while my sister orchestrated a targeted heist. The physical deed locked in my safe was just a piece of decorative paper. The county registry represented the true legal battleground. If Julian and Richard possessed my official signature, they could forge a fraudulent transfer of ownership. They could bypass the trust restrictions entirely and reclaim the Leawood estate. My phone illuminated on the desk beside my keyboard. A new email notification appeared on the locked screen. The sender was attorney Harrison Cole. The subject line read, "Urgent legal update required." The trap I thought I was setting for my parents had just flipped. The true forensic warfare had officially begun. The email from Harrison Cole glowed against the dark background of my monitor. Urgent legal update required. I glanced at the digital clock located in the bottom corner of my screen. The glowing numbers read 8:15 in the morning. I had not slept a single minute since Vanessa walked out of my apartment last night. I spent the dark hours cataloging Julian's corporate shell companies and securing my remaining physical files. My sister had successfully stolen my voided tax form during her theatrical performance. Now my family was executing the next phase of their heist. I did not bother typing a reply to the attorney. I reached for my cell phone and dialed his direct, private office line. It rang exactly one time before he answered. "Ms. Harrell," Cole said. His voice lacked its usual measured, professional cadence. He sounded tense and rushed. "We have a critical situation developing at the county property registry." "Tell me what you see," I replied. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and kept my eyes focused on the spreadsheet illuminating my screen. "The county clerk just contacted my office," Cole explained. "When Beatrice established the irrevocable trust, we placed a permanent monitoring flag on the Leawood parcel. Any new filing attempts automatically trigger a notification to the trustee of record. Your father and your brother are standing at the registry counter right now." I picked up my heavy red fountain pen from the mahogany desk surface. I rolled the cool brass casing between my fingers. "What type of paperwork are they trying to submit?" "A quitclaim deed," Cole answered. "The instrument supposedly relinquishes your sole ownership of the estate and transfers the property title entirely back into Richard's name. The clerk sent a preliminary digital scan to my secure inbox for verification. I am forwarding the PDF file to you right now." A new notification pinged through my computer speakers. I opened the encrypted attachment. A high-resolution image of the fraudulent county document populated my monitor. I scrolled down past the boilerplate legal jargon and focused on the bottom of the second page. There sat my stolen signature. The cursive script matched my official banking autograph flawlessly. Vanessa had likely used a high-quality translucent tracing paper and a heavy ink roller to transfer the design from the voided tax form onto the new deed. It looked convincing at first glance. Then my eyes caught a secondary detail located just below the cursive ink. The county form required the grantor to print their full legal name beneath the signature line for public record clarity. The printed text displayed Dulcie Lillian Harrell. I stared at the letters and felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. My birth certificate reads Dulcie Lillian Harrell. The name utilizes one single L in the center. It belonged to my paternal grandmother. Sylvia despised my paternal grandmother with a burning, unhidden passion. Because of this petty hatred, my mother always spelled my middle name with 2 L's. She did it on my childhood birthday cards. She did it on my high school graduation announcements. She weaponized the spelling as a tiny daily act of disrespect. Vanessa had stolen the cursive signature, but Sylvia had filled out the surrounding printed application fields. My entire family was actively complicit in this crime. They were working together to strip me of my inheritance. I moved my gaze to the right side of the page. Next to the printed name sat a bright blue notary stamp. The official seal was required to validate the transfer of real estate. I zoomed in on the circular emblem. The registered notary name read Gregory Thorne. "Harrison," I said into the phone, "look at the notary seal on your copy." "I see it," Cole responded. "The stamp belongs to a Gregory Thorne. Do you know him?" "He is a former business associate of my father," I explained. "They invested in commercial strip malls together a decade ago. Thorne lost his state notary commission 3 years ago. He was caught falsifying vehicle titles for a used car dealership. They are using an expired or counterfeit stamp to validate this transaction." Cole let out a heavy sigh over the line. The sound of shuffling papers echoed through the receiver. "This is an egregious violation of property law. They are committing blatant forgery to steal a $2.5 million asset. I am calling the local precinct. I can have patrol units at the registry building in 5 minutes to arrest them for attempted grand larceny." "No," I commanded. My voice cut through the phone speaker with absolute authority. "Do not call the police. Do not alert the county clerk. Tell the registry office to clear the trust flag and process the paperwork." Silence stretched across the cellular connection. When Cole finally spoke, his tone betrayed deep confusion. "Dulcie, you cannot be serious. If the clerk stamps that file, your father legally reclaims the house. You will lose the estate." "I will lose an illusion," I corrected him. "Listen to me very carefully, Harrison. I am a financial auditor. I know how the justice system treats white-collar crime. If you send the police right now, Julian and Richard will simply claim ignorance. They will tell the detectives it was a terrible misunderstanding over estate intent. They will blame the notary. They might face minor civil penalties or probation for attempted fraud." I paused and took a slow, measured breath. I looked at the forged document glowing on my screen. "However," I continued, "if the county officially records that deed, the dynamic shifts permanently. It ceases to be a messy family disagreement. The moment that file enters the public record, they have successfully executed a felony fraud against the government. If Julian tries to list the house for sale using that fraudulent title, he commits interstate wire fraud. I do not want them stopped at the starting line. I want them to build their own prison. I want the concrete to dry around their ankles before they even realize they are trapped." Cole understood the cold mathematics of my strategy. He recognized the tactical advantage of allowing an enemy to complete their mistake. "You are indemnifying my firm of any liability regarding this transaction," Cole stated. He was speaking for his own internal call recording system now. "I fully indemnify your firm," I confirmed. "Authorize the transfer. Let them take the house." "Understood, Ms. Harrell. I am contacting the clerk now." The line disconnected. I set my phone face down on the mahogany desk. I walked into my kitchen and picked up the ceramic mug Vanessa had used the previous night. I poured the remaining cold chamomile tea down the stainless steel sink drain. I washed the cup with hot water and soap. I scrubbed the rim methodically. I thought about my brother while I cleaned the kitchen. Julian started his first business at age 16. He launched a neighborhood lawn care service. He collected upfront cash deposits from 5 elderly neighbors and never mowed a single blade of grass. Richard laughed off the theft as a smart business lesson. He called it an advance on future services. I spent my afternoons secretly mowing those lawns after school, just to prevent the neighbors from calling the police on my family. My parents always justified Julian's deceit as an entrepreneurial spirit. They taught him that rules were merely suggestions designed for the lower classes. They operated on the arrogant assumption that their actions carried zero consequences. Today, I was proving them right in the short term. to ensure their absolute financial destruction in the long term. I returned to my office and sat down. I waited for the inevitable confirmation of their success. The digital clock on my taskbar flipped to 10:30 in the morning. My cell phone vibrated against the hard desk surface. The screen illuminated with a new text message notification. The sender name displayed Julian. I swiped the glass screen to open the application. The text message contained only 2 sentences. The words dripped with unearned arrogance and smug victory. "House is officially Dad's again. You get nothing." I read the message 3 times. I did not type a reply. I pressed the side buttons on my device and captured a digital screenshot of his confession. Julian truly believed he had just won the war. He felt invincible. He did not realize he had just handed me a signed confession to a felony crime. My mind immediately shifted to the next phase of the audit. A forged deed held no actual monetary value unless the property was liquidated. Julian was hemorrhaging cash and dodging federal tax liens. He would not sit on a $2.5 million asset. He would try to sell it. He would move with reckless speed to convert the stolen brick and mortar into untraceable liquid funds. I opened a new tab on my internet browser. I navigated to a premier real estate portal that serviced the affluent neighborhoods of the Kansas City metropolitan area. The trap was set and armed. I just needed to watch him step onto the trigger. Julian operated with the frantic, erratic energy of a drowning man thrashing for a lifeline. He secured the fraudulent title on a Tuesday morning. I knew he would avoid listing the Leawood property on the standard multiple listing service used by conventional real estate agencies. Traditional property transactions require 30 to 60 days for tedious inspections, rigorous financing approvals, and prolonged closing procedures. Julian did not possess the luxury of time. The Internal Revenue Service breathes down a target's neck with a relentless, suffocating rhythm. He needed liquid cash immediately to satiate federal auditors and to salvage his failing offshore cryptocurrency accounts. To bypass the sluggish public market, my brother utilized a specialized tactic known exclusively among the ultra-wealthy. The strategy is called a whisper listing. This method involves circulating a private portfolio strictly to aggressive commercial developers, international venture capitalists, and cash-heavy hedge funds. These specific buyers possess the enormous capital required to close multi-million-dollar deals within 48 hours. They crave prime suburban acreage to bulldoze for subdivisions, and they rarely ask personal questions about the sellers. Julian believed his secret market remained completely hidden from my view. He severely underestimated the sheer magnitude of my professional reach. Over a brutal decade working as a senior corporate auditor, I cultivated a vast, intricate network of financial analysts, wealth managers, and elite commercial brokers throughout the Kansas City metropolitan area. On Thursday afternoon, a trusted colleague from a boutique investment firm forwarded an encrypted email directly to my secure inbox. The subject line promoted an exclusive off-market acquisition opportunity in the heart of Leawood. I opened the digital flyer and studied the presentation. High-resolution photographs of my childhood home filled the computer screen. The asking price sat firm at $2.5 million. Terms dictated an all-cash transaction, an as-is property condition, and a mandatory 3-day closing window. The marketing language boasted of an incredibly clean title and highly motivated sellers. An elegant invitation at the bottom of the page detailed a private showing event scheduled for that upcoming Saturday morning. I spent Friday evening finalizing my counteroffensive. I sat at my mahogany desk and assembled a physical ledger. Digital files can be deleted, corrupted, or plausibly denied by skilled defense attorneys. Hard copies carry a specific, undeniable gravity. I purchased a heavy navy blue 3-ring binder. Inside the thick plastic covers, I meticulously organized the architecture of my family's deception. Section 1 contained the Delaware Shell Company registrations proving the money laundering trail. Section 2 held the printed digital screenshot of Julian's text message boasting about his victory, serving as a written confession. Section 3 housed a certified copy of the forged quitclaim document, clearly displaying my deliberately misspelled middle name and the expired notary stamp. Section 4 secured the public records regarding the crippling federal tax liens levied against my brother's phantom businesses. I categorized each paper with pristine plastic dividers. Growing up in the Harrell household required developing severe defense mechanisms against a constantly shifting, unreliable reality. Sylvia and Richard routinely rewrote our family history to suit their immediate emotional conveniences. If Julian broke a valuable vase, my parents convinced themselves the ceramic was already cracked by the housekeeper. If he stole cash directly from my childhood piggy bank, they labeled the event an accidental misplacement. My intense reliance on concrete numbers and immutable documentation sprouted from a desperate early need for objective truth. The heavy navy binder represented the ultimate unbreakable reality they could not gaslight. The final component of my ledger required fresh ink. I opened a specialized legal software program on my laptop and drafted a formal notice of pending action. In real estate terminology, the document is known as a lis pendens. When filed with the county clerk, this single page functions as a devastating financial landmine. It publicly declares an active legal dispute regarding the true ownership of a specific parcel of land. No legitimate title insurance company on earth will underwrite a policy on a property burdened by an active lis pendens. Without secure title insurance, cash buyers and developers instantly walk away to protect their investments. The document renders the asset utterly toxic and legally unsellable. It freezes escrow accounts and halts wire transfers dead in their tracks. I reviewed the paragraphs detailing the fraudulent transfer and the deliberate breach of the irrevocable trust. The wording was surgical, cold, and precise, leaving zero room for creative interpretation. I retrieved my heavy red fountain pen from its protective leather case. The brass casing felt cool and solid against my palm. I uncapped the tip and signed my stylized signature at the bottom of the page. The crimson ink dried quickly, finalizing the weapon that would dismantle my brother's escape plan. I placed the notice into the front interior pocket of the navy binder. Saturday morning arrived with a biting, bitter chill. The Kansas sky stretched overhead in a pale, cloudless expanse of gray. I prepared for the private showing event with the meticulous care of a soldier armoring up for a final campaign. I selected a tailored charcoal suit crafted from imported Italian wool. The sharp lines and structured shoulders projected an unyielding authority. I wore a crisp white silk blouse and polished black leather pumps. I pulled my dark hair into a tight, immaculate knot at the base of my neck. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly like a corporate executioner. I slid the red fountain pen into the interior pocket of my blazer. I grabbed the heavy navy binder and walked out the door. The drive back to the affluent suburb felt remarkably different this time. The familiar anxiety that used to knot my stomach whenever I approached my parents' neighborhood was entirely absent. Absolute clarity had burned away the residual fear. I parked my sedan 3 blocks away from the estate. I wanted to control my physical approach and monitor the perimeter. I walked down the quiet, tree-lined sidewalks. The crisp morning air stung my cheeks. As I neared the familiar property line, I observed a long row of luxury vehicles lined up along the curb. Blacked-out sport utility vehicles and sleek imported sedans dominated the street parking. Julian had successfully attracted a school of very wealthy, very hungry sharks. I walked up the sweeping brick driveway. A stack of open cardboard boxes sat near the grand front porch pillars. The top flaps were folded outward. I glanced inside as I passed the threshold. The boxes contained glossy, expedited marketing brochures featuring gorgeous twilight photography of the estate. The smell of fresh printer ink radiated from the thick cardstock, carrying a distinct, sharp chemical odor. It smelled like pure desperation. Julian had rushed the printing overnight, paying an exorbitant premium to legitimize his fraudulent sale and dazzle the investors. I bypassed the welcome table positioned near the entryway. A hired hostess in a sleek black dress attempted to intercept me and ask for my business card. I did not break my stride. I offered her a single, silencing glance, that made her drop her clipboard to her side. I stepped through the mahogany front doors and entered the foyer. The interior hummed with low, calculated conversations. Men in bespoke suits and women carrying designer briefcases wandered through the expansive rooms, evaluating the custom crown molding and measuring the square footage with their discerning eyes. The scent of cinnamon vanilla candles floated through the air, burning in a vain attempt to mask the tension soaking into the drywall. Sylvia stood near the grand staircase holding a silver tray of champagne flutes. She wore a tailored designer dress, performing her favorite role of the gracious aristocratic matriarch. Richard hovered nervously by the living room fireplace, his smile looking forced, brittle, and rigid. Julian held court in the center of the massive kitchen. He leaned casually against the marble island, gesturing expansively with his hands, while speaking to a group of 3 serious-looking men in dark overcoats. He was actively selling them the illusion. He was promising a seamless, unencumbered transfer of generational wealth. I gripped the spine of the navy binder. My leather heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor as I navigated through the affluent crowd. I moved directly toward the kitchen, blending into the sea of corporate buyers, preparing to pull the pin on the explosive reality I held in my hands. I blended into the periphery of the kitchen, listening to the low hum of negotiations. The cloying scent of cinnamon vanilla candles saturated the air. Sylvia had placed 3 large glass jars on the marble countertops. The sweet fragrance fought a losing battle against the sharp, underlying odor of fresh paint and printer ink. Julian stood with his back to me. He swirled a glass of sparkling water while addressing a trio of severe-looking men in tailored, dark topcoats. These were the cash buyers. I stepped closer, stopping just outside his peripheral vision. "The beauty of this acquisition lies in the speed," Julian boasted to the tallest man in the group. "We hold a pristine, unencumbered title. 0 liens, 0 mortgage contingencies. My father is looking to downsize, and we are prepared to execute a clean transfer within 48 hours. You will not find a smoother transaction in this zip code." The dramatic irony tasted like cold steel on my tongue. He stood there selling a fabricated reality, while I stood 3 feet away, holding the explosive truth in a heavy navy binder. The buyers nodded, exchanging approving glances. A clean title in a prime location represented a rare, lucrative prize. Across the room, Sylvia materialized. She flashed her brilliant, practiced smile at a different group of prospective investors. "If you will follow me upstairs," my mother announced, her voice projecting over the gentle murmur of the crowd, "I would love to show you the newly renovated Executive Command Center. It offers incredible natural light and serves as the perfect home office for a modern professional." She was leading them to my former bedroom. I detached myself from the kitchen wall and followed the procession up the oak staircase. My leather pumps made no sound on the thick runner rug. I trailed behind 2 women in designer trench coats and a man carrying a leather portfolio. We reached the second-floor landing and stepped into the slate-gray room. The space looked sterile and foreign. The glass-topped standing desk dominated the center of the floor. Sylvia gestured toward the large window overlooking the manicured backyard. "As you can see," she purred, "we spared no expense modernizing the layout." A sharp-looking man in a navy blazer stepped forward. He wore a lapel pin identifying him as the listing broker representing my brother's fraudulent sale. He smiled at the group, preparing to pitch the square footage. I stepped through the doorway and moved to the center of the room. "Before anyone discusses square footage," I said. My voice projected clear and calm, cutting through the polite chatter like a scalpel. "I have a vital question for the listing broker." The room fell silent. Sylvia whipped her head around. The practiced smile instantly vanished from her face, leaving behind a mask of sheer terror. The color drained from her cheeks. "Dulcie," my mother hissed under her breath. I ignored her entirely. I locked my eyes on the broker in the navy blazer. "As the primary agent representing this transaction," I addressed him directly, "can you please provide these prospective buyers with a copy of the preliminary title insurance report?" The broker blinked. He offered a polite but confused professional smile. We are currently expediting the title commitment. It will be provided during the escrow period. You cannot provide it, I countered smoothly, because no legitimate underwriter will issue a policy on this parcel. I unzipped my portfolio case. I withdrew the heavy navy blue binder and opened it flat on the glass standing desk. I pulled out the crisp, freshly filed document bearing the county clerk's stamp. I hold the true legal deed to this estate, I announced to the room of wealthy investors. This property is currently locked under an active lis pendens. I filed the notice of pending legal action this morning. The seller you are negotiating with forged a quitclaim deed using a stolen signature and a counterfeit notary seal. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd. The man with the leather portfolio took an immediate step backward, away from the desk. Julian burst into the room. He had heard the commotion from the stairs. He pushed past the investors, his face flushed, a dark, mottled crimson. "Do not listen to her," Julian shouted. His voice cracked, fracturing his confident facade. "She is a disgruntled relative. She has no legal standing here." I turned a page in my binder. I extracted the high-resolution digital capture of his text message confession. I placed it next to the lis pendens. Then I pulled out the fraudulent quitclaim deed, displaying my deliberately misspelled middle name. I arranged the documents in a neat, precise row on the glass surface. "This is a signed confession sent from his personal phone," I stated, pointing to the text message printout. "And this is the forged county submission. The authorities have already been notified of the federal wire fraud attempt occurring in this house today." The reaction was instantaneous. Wealthy developers and seasoned investors do not tolerate messy legal entanglements. They thrive on clean, swift acquisitions. The mere mention of a lis pendens and federal wire fraud acted like a potent repellent. The man with the portfolio did not say a word. He turned on his heel and walked briskly out the door. The two women in trench coats followed close behind him, their faces twisted in disgust. The listing broker stared at the documents on the desk. He recognized the authentic county stamps. He realized he had been duped into facilitating a felony. His professional reputation hung in the balance. "The listing is canceled," the broker said. His tone sounded like cracking ice. He glared at Julian. "Do not ever contact my firm again. You will be hearing from our legal department." He shoved past my brother and hurried down the stairs. The murmur of panic spread to the first floor. Within 60 seconds, the front door opened and closed multiple times. The sound of expensive car engines roaring to life echoed through the neighborhood. The private showing evaporated. The grand open house transformed into a ghost town. Sylvia leaned against the slate gray wall. Her knees trembled. The aristocratic matriarch persona she spent 30 years building shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Her country club friends would hear about this within the hour. The wealthy elite of Leawood possess a ruthless gossip network. She knew her social standing had just been incinerated in front of her eyes. She covered her face with her hands and began to weep. I closed my navy binder. The metal ring snapped shut with a definitive, satisfying click. I picked it up and turned toward the doorway. Richard blocked the exit. My father stood in the threshold, blocking my path. He breathed in heavy, ragged gasps. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. The financial desperation had finally stripped away his cowardly enabler persona, revealing something far more dangerous beneath the surface. He had watched his last remaining lifeline vanish. "You ruined everything," Richard snarled. His voice vibrated with a raw, guttural rage. I stepped forward, intending to walk past him. "I audited a fraud. You ruined yourselves." As I tried to move through the doorframe, Richard lunged. His hand shot out and clamped down on my upper arm. His grip felt like a steel vise. The fabric of my wool suit jacket bunched under his tightening fingers. He squeezed hard enough to grind the fabric into my muscle. The sudden physical restraint sent a sharp jolt of pain radiating down to my elbow. I froze. My parents had employed deep psychological manipulation for decades, but they had never crossed the threshold into physical force. This represented a terrifying escalation. "You are going to fix this," Richard demanded. He leaned his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You are going to withdraw that notice today." "Let go of my arm," I said. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. Julian stood paralyzed in the center of the room, watching his father cross an unforgivable line. Sylvia sobbed against the wall, unable to intervene. "You owe this family," Richard squeezed harder. A dark bruise was already forming beneath my sleeve. "You will sign the paperwork and give me back my house." I looked down at his white-knuckled grip. Then I looked directly into his desperate, bloodshot eyes. I realized he was no longer acting as a father. He was acting as a cornered predator. And cornered predators require swift legal cages. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I whispered. I jerked my arm backward, breaking his hold. I walked down the staircase and out the front door without looking back. My physical safety was now compromised. The financial war had escalated. I needed a judge. I needed an emergency injunction. I needed a restraining order. The engine of my sedan idled with a low, steady hum. I sat parked 3 blocks away from the estate. The heater blasted warm air through the vents, but I still felt a deep, lingering chill. My right bicep throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. I unbuttoned my suit jacket and pushed up the wool sleeve. A dark purple constellation of fingerprints had already begun to bloom across my pale skin. Richard had lost his temper. He had also lost his strategic advantage. When Harris and Cole finalized the deed transfer, my first action as the legal homeowner involved upgrading the perimeter defenses. I anticipated my parents would try something desperate. They operated on a foundation of entitlement and denied reality whenever it suited them. Grandma Beatrice always warned me that trust was a liability without proper verification. During my initial inspection of the house, I hired a private security contractor to install discrete, high-definition recording lenses in the primary living spaces. The foyer, the kitchen, and the main hallway were fully monitored by an encrypted digital network. I picked up my cell phone and opened the secure surveillance application. I scrubbed the digital timeline back 20 minutes. The crisp video feed displayed the slate-gray room. The audio captured the exact moment the wealthy investors fled down the stairs. Then the recording captured Richard lunging. The camera documented his hand clamping onto my arm like a steel vise. The microphone picked up his guttural threat, demanding I surrender the $2.5 million property. I exported the video file directly to my secure cloud storage. I paired the footage with the high-resolution scan of the forged quitclaim deed. The Johnson County District Courthouse smelled of industrial floor wax and exhausted bureaucracy. I sat at a polished wooden table facing a seasoned family court judge. A domestic violence protective order normally requires extensive documentation to prove an ongoing historical pattern of physical abuse. I did not possess a long history of police reports. I possessed something far more effective. I brought an undeniable ledger of escalating criminal behavior. The judge reviewed the paperwork in profound silence. He examined the forged real estate transfer, noting the counterfeit notary seal. He read the text message confession Julian sent to my phone. Then I handed him a digital tablet playing the security footage from the open house. He watched my father physically restrain me to extort a valuable asset. The combination of federal wire fraud and physical intimidation created an unarguable portrait of clear and present danger. The judge slid the final emergency injunction across the heavy wooden bench. He asked me to sign the affidavit swearing to the truth of the provided evidence under penalty of perjury. I unzipped my leather portfolio. I withdrew my heavy red fountain pen. I removed the brass cap and pressed the metal nib against the thick parchment. The crimson ink flowed smoothly across the signature line. The judge stamped the document, sealing the order with a loud thud. The legal calculus had officially changed. The previous 30-day eviction notice I served Sylvia was now entirely void. The emergency protective order dictated that Richard and Julian posed an active physical threat to my safety. They were legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my person or my residence. They had exactly 48 hours to vacate the Leawood estate. 2 days later, I returned to the affluent neighborhood. I parked my car down the street from the wide brick driveway. The Kansas sky hung low and heavy with gray winter clouds. 2 marked police cruisers turned the corner and rolled slowly toward my childhood home. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the manicured neighborhood windows, drawing the attention of every wealthy resident on the block. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles. They marched up the brick pathway and knocked heavily on the mahogany front door. From my vantage point inside the car, I watched the scene unfold with clear precision. Richard answered the door. His shoulders slumped in total defeat. The officers handed him the court order. They informed him he had 1 hour to gather essential belongings under their direct, strict supervision. Panic erupted inside the house. I watched through the large bay windows as my family scrambled like fleeing trespassers. Julian darted up and down the oak staircase. He faced a severe logistical nightmare. He had staged a fraudulent open house just 2 days prior. To maintain the illusion of a clean, spacious property, he had thrown away every cardboard box and piece of packing material in the garage. They possessed 0 moving supplies. The irony tasted sweeter than vintage wine. Julian emerged from the side door carrying a familiar object. It was one of the brittle, generic plastic storage bins from the damp basement. It was the exact same cheap container they had used to shove my tailored coats into during Thanksgiving. The lid still bowed awkwardly over the edges. Julian dropped the bin onto the driveway concrete. He ran back inside and emerged carrying armfuls of his prized wardrobe. My brother obsessed over his material wealth to project success to his investors. He held limited edition imported sneakers that cost over $1,000 a pair. He carried bespoke tailored suits and expensive Italian leather loafers. With the police officers tapping their watches, Julian had no time to fold or protect his luxury items. He shoved his pristine white sneakers directly into the mildewed plastic. He crushed the expensive leather trying to force the brittle lid shut. He jammed his custom suits on top of the shoes, wadding the expensive fabric into tight, wrinkled balls. The damp concrete smell of the cellar would soak into his entire wardrobe permanently. He filled 4 bins in total. It was the exact number they had used to erase my existence. Richard carried 2 black garbage bags filled with basic toiletries and loose clothing. He loaded them into the trunk of Sylvia's sedan. My mother walked out, holding her jewelry box and her designer purse. Her face was hidden behind oversized dark sunglasses to shield her profound humiliation from the peering neighbors. The police officers escorted them to their vehicles. My family stood in the driveway watching the Leawood estate slip from their grasp forever. The patrol cars followed their vehicles out of the neighborhood to ensure complete compliance with the distance mandate. I sat alone in my quiet vehicle. The property was finally mine. The financial drain was severed. The physical threat was neutralized. I reached for the ignition key to start the engine and claim my home. My cell phone buzzed against the center console. A new text message illuminated the screen. The sender was my younger sister, Vanessa. The message contained no words. It only featured a digital screenshot taken from a private community social media group. The image displayed a sprawling, multi-paragraph post written by Sylvia. My mother had fired the next volley in the war. The digital screenshot illuminated the dark interior of my car. I tapped the high-resolution image to expand the text. Sylvia had posted her sprawling manifesto in the private Leawood Heights Neighborhood Association social media group. Over 400 prominent residents, local business owners, and country club board members had front-row seats to her fabricated tragedy. My mother titled the post, "A Plea for Our Family." She claimed I had suffered a severe emotional breakdown. She accused me of manipulating a confused elderly woman to steal the generational family estate. She deployed the phrase elder abuse twice in the opening paragraph. She painted Richard as a frail, sick patriarch cast out into the freezing winter by a deeply troubled and vindictive daughter. She asked for community prayers and legal recommendations. The comments section unspooled beneath the post in a frenzy of suburban outrage. The local Whisper network mobilized instantly. A prominent church elder commented, offering swift prayers for my troubled soul. The country club tennis captain expressed absolute shock, branding my actions as unforgivable. Vanessa sent a follow-up text message immediately after the screenshot. She asked if I planned to hire a public relations firm or post a defensive rebuttal. She warned me that the entire town was turning against me. I did not type a reply. I locked my phone and tossed the device onto the passenger seat. Narcissists thrive on public conflict. They utilize drama as oxygen. If I posted a rebuttal, it would legitimize her narrative as a debate. It would give Sylvia the engaging battle she desperately craved. I refused to participate in a suburban soap opera. I knew the objective truth lived securely in a county registry and a stamped judicial court order. Let the neighbors whisper. Gossip carries zero legal weight. I experienced the social fallout the very next morning. I walked into the local artisan coffee shop on Main Street to purchase an espresso. The lively chatter inside the cafe died instantly as I crossed the threshold. The barista, a young woman who usually greeted me by name, suddenly found the cash register screen intensely fascinating. Two women wearing expensive yoga apparel whispered behind their hands while glaring at me from a corner booth. I ordered my coffee. I paid with a credit card. I looked directly into the eyes of the whispering women until they uncomfortably looked away. I took my hot cup and walked out into the cold morning air. Silence starves manipulators. I channeled my focus away from the neighborhood rumors and directed it toward reclaiming my physical space. Friday evening arrived, bringing a quiet stillness to the Leawood estate. I walked through the grand foyer. The absence of Sylvia's cloying cinnamon vanilla candles left the air smelling of pine cleaner and old wood. I changed into durable denim work clothes. I retrieved a heavy steel crowbar, a utility knife, and a pair of thick leather gloves from the garage. I carried the tools up the oak staircase to the second floor. Julian's slate gray command center felt like an infection spreading inside the house. I intended to cure it. I started with the glass standing desk, dismantling the heavy metal frame piece by piece. I unbolted the large whiteboard from the drywall. I carried the hardware down to the curb. Then I directed my attention to the floor. Julian had covered the original rich hardwood with a cheap synthetic gray carpet to mimic a sterile corporate aesthetic. I knelt by the baseboards. I gripped the utility knife and sliced a long, deep seam down the center of the room. The synthetic fibers snapped under the sharp steel blade. I gripped the jagged edge of the carpet and pulled backward using my entire body weight. The industrial staples groaned and ripped free from the subfloor. A thick cloud of fine trapped dust billowed into the air. The physical labor offered profound catharsis. My muscles ached. Sweat gathered at my hairline. I rolled the cheap gray material into heavy, awkward cylinders and dragged them into the hallway. I tore up the thin foam padding exposing the original oak floorboards underneath. I grabbed a push broom and swept the remaining debris toward the door. As I stepped near the large bay window, a distinct sound broke the quiet rhythm of the sweeping. A sharp, hollow creak echoed from the floorboards. I stopped moving. I stepped back and pressed the heavy rubber sole of my work boot directly onto the wood. The oak board shifted downward by a fraction of an inch. It felt loose. I knelt down and examined the grain of the wood. The surrounding planks were secured tightly with countersunk nails. This specific board featured two tiny empty holes near the edge, where the finishing nails had been intentionally removed. I wedged the flat end of my steel crowbar into the narrow gap between the planks. I applied firm, downward pressure. The oak board popped loose with a sharp crack. I lifted the wood and set it carefully aside. Nestled deep between the dusty wooden floor joists sat a heavy, rectangular lockbox. The metal casing felt cold to the touch. It was an older vintage model, coated in dark green enamel. A simple brass keyhole secured the heavy latch. I pulled the box from the dark cavity and placed it on the floor. I knew this green box. I recognized the enamel from a specific summer nearly 2 decades ago. I stood up and walked to the built-in bookshelf located near the closet. I reached my hand behind the top tier of the wooden shelving and felt for a small, hidden vertical groove. My fingers brushed against a tiny brass key taped securely to the backing board. Grandma Beatrice never changed her hiding spots. I retrieved the key and knelt back down beside the green box. I inserted the brass into the lock. The internal tumblers clicked satisfyingly into place. My mind drifted back to a humid August afternoon. I was 14 years old. I sat in the sunroom adjacent to the kitchen. Grandma Beatrice sat across from me at a wrought iron patio table. She wore a tailored linen suit despite the stifling summer heat. The air smelled of her signature lavender perfume and starched fabric. A thick, leather-bound ledger rested on the table between us. Richard had just missed my junior high graduation ceremony. He skipped the event to attend a weekend golf tournament with Julian. I sat in the sunroom, trying to hide my quiet devastation behind a blank expression. Beatrice did not offer me empty comfort. She did not provide soft maternal platitudes. She understood that sympathy does not build armor. She opened the heavy ledger and handed me a fountain pen. "Learn to balance this," she instructed. Her voice sounded firm and precise. She pointed to a complex column of financial figures. "People will disappoint you, Dulcie. They will twist facts and rewrite their promises to suit their own emotional conveniences. Blood makes you related, but a balanced ledger keeps you safe. Numbers never lie, and receipts never forget." The memory faded, leaving me kneeling on the bare oak floor of my childhood bedroom. I lifted the heavy steel lid of the lockbox. The hinges squealed in protest. I expected to find vintage jewelry or perhaps forgotten silver certificates from her youth. Instead, I found a thick stack of pristine, heavy parchment paper. I lifted the top document from the metal container. The official bold heading read, "Promissory Note and Loan Agreement." The date stamped at the top right corner indicated a transaction executed 7 years ago. The principal amount listed, $300,000. The signature at the bottom of the page belonged exclusively to Richard Harrell. I sifted through the stack with trembling fingers. There were 5 separate agreements in total. Each document detailed a substantial cash transfer from Beatrice directly to my father. Each paper bore his authentic signature, accepting the funds as a formal commercial loan. The terms explicitly stated the debt was payable on demand upon her death. I calculated the figures in my head. The combined total verified the exact number Harrison Cole had quoted in the mahogany conference room: $1.2 million. During the estate meeting, I believed the poison pill was merely a structural, digital clause within the trust documents. I thought the debt existed as a digital record hidden in a lawyer's encrypted filing cabinet. I was wrong. Beatrice had kept the original physical contracts. She hid them under the floorboards of the very room they tried to take from me. She ensured I would be the one to find the physical evidence. Julian and Richard thought they could ruin my reputation through a desperate social media smear campaign. Sylvia thought the local whisper network would force me into psychological submission. They operated under the delusion that public perception equated to actual power. They did not understand the true, ruthless nature of financial warfare. Gossip and Facebook posts hold zero legal weight in a courtroom. Original signed promissory notes possess the power to garnish future wages, freeze bank accounts, and liquidate remaining assets. I picked up the thick stack of parchment papers. The crisp edges felt sharp against my fingertips. I did not need to defend myself against the neighborhood rumors. I did not need to hire a public relations firm. I was no longer just the surviving victim of a toxic family dynamic. I had just become their primary secured creditor. I placed the notes securely into my leather portfolio. I reached for my cell phone and dialed Harrison Cole. The defensive stage of this war was officially over. It was time to collect the debt. Harrison Cole adjusted a high-intensity desk lamp to illuminate the center of his workspace. He slipped a pair of thin, white cotton gloves over his hands before reaching for the fragile documents. I sat across from him in the same leather chair where Julian had thrown his tantrum just weeks prior. The power dynamic in the room had shifted on its axis. I no longer sat as a defensive daughter bracing for the next blow. I sat as the primary creditor to the men who tried to erase my future. The lawyer lifted the first parchment paper from the stack I recovered beneath the floorboards. He examined the watermarks holding the thick material up against the bright halogen bulb. He scrutinized Richard's signature, comparing the ink strokes to known exemplars from the estate files. He paused on the third document in the pile. It was a loan agreement dated October of 2018. A distinct faded brown ring marked the bottom right corner of the page. It was a coffee stain. Grandma Beatrice drank her coffee black and scalding hot while reviewing her evening ledgers. She often rested her ceramic mug directly on her paperwork, leaving permanent tannin rings on the margins. That specific imperfection guaranteed the authenticity of the contract. No forensic defense expert could claim, "I printed these documents yesterday." The aged ink and the seeped fibers told an unarguable historical truth. "These are flawless," the attorney murmured. He carefully placed the aged note back onto the stack. "Your grandmother executed these commercial loans with meticulous precision. The acceleration clauses are clearly defined. She secured his personal guarantee on every single transfer." "Do they transfer to the trust?" I asked. I needed the legal mechanics vocalized. "They do," he confirmed. When Beatrice funded the irrevocable trust, she transferred all personal accounts receivable into the entity. As the sole trustee and exclusive beneficiary, you own this financial obligation. Richard Harrell legally owes you $1.2 million. The terms indicate the balance became payable in full upon her death. He removed the cotton gloves and picked up a silver pen. "I will draft a standard certified demand letter and mail it to their new address this afternoon. The postal receipt will serve as initial notification." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood. Standard certified mail felt too passive. A mail carrier dropping an envelope into a metal slot allowed the recipient to ignore the reality for a few extra hours. It allowed Sylvia to place the envelope on a kitchen counter and pretend it did not exist. I required a delivery method that shattered their denial upon impact. "Do not mail it," I instructed. "Draft the formal demand. I will hire a private process server to deliver it by hand." Richard and Sylvia had exhausted their remaining cash reserves on legal retainers and moving expenses following the emergency eviction. They could no longer afford the manicured serenity of the Leawood suburbs. They relocated to a cramped garden-style apartment complex situated right next to a busy interstate highway. The neighborhood featured cracked asphalt parking lots, chain-link fences, and the relentless droning roar of commercial freight trucks. On Tuesday afternoon, I parked my sedan across the street from Building 4. The sky threatened freezing rain. The gray clouds mirrored the bleak architecture of the housing complex. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling, watching the narrow concrete breezeway on the second floor. I hired a seasoned process server named Miller. He possessed a stern face, broad shoulders, and a reputation for relentless efficiency. At exactly 2 o'clock, Miller stepped out of his unmarked vehicle and walked up the exterior metal staircase. He carried a thick manila envelope containing the formal demand for the 7-figure debt. I watched through my windshield as Miller navigated the narrow walkway. He stopped in front of apartment 212. He knocked sharply on the hollow core door. The hollow thud carried across the parking lot. The door opened inward. Sylvia stood in the threshold. The wealthy, aristocratic matriarch persona had vanished. She wore a faded gray cardigan over loose sweatpants. Her hair hung flat and unstyled around her face. She looked exhausted, drained of the artificial superiority that used to fuel her daily interactions. Miller did not offer a polite greeting. He confirmed her identity with a brief question. I saw Sylvia nod her head. Miller thrust the thick envelope directly into her hands. He spoke the necessary legal phrase confirming she had been served and immediately turned away. He walked back down the metal stairs, leaving her standing in the open doorway. Sylvia stared at the envelope. She peeled back the adhesive flap and extracted the crisp legal pages. I watched her read the bold header. I watched her eyes scan the principal amount due. Her physical reaction provided a clinical study in sudden devastation. Her knees buckled slightly. She reached out and grasped the cheap vinyl siding of the exterior wall to steady herself. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, translucent shade of gray. She raised a trembling hand to her mouth. For weeks, Sylvia had hidden behind the digital safety of her private community social media groups. She typed out frantic manifestos, casting herself as a tragic victim. She sought comfort in the empty prayers of country club acquaintances. But online comments cannot pay a massive commercial debt. The Whisper Network could not save her from a formal financial collection. The cold, hard reality of the numbers finally pierced her delusion. She stumbled backward into the cramped living space, and the door clicked shut. While I sat in the car monitoring the delivery, my cell phone vibrated in my lap. I picked up the device and opened a secure, encrypted messaging application. The notification came from an associate embedded within the regional financial compliance sector. I had anonymously forwarded Julian's corporate shell data to the appropriate taxation authorities days ago. Government agencies operate slowly, but automated banking algorithms strike with immediate precision. The message contained a brief summary report. Julian's primary domestic banking institution had received the formal federal tax lien notice. Under standard anti-money laundering protocols, the bank compliance software automatically triggered a system-wide freeze on all connected profiles. The algorithm traced his Social Security number across the Delaware limited liability companies, identifying every hidden reservoir of capital. My brother's meager remaining cash reserves were now entirely locked. He could not execute wire transfers. He could not withdraw physical currency. He could not even swipe a debit card to purchase a tank of gas. The decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges require a link to a verified fiat banking account to process withdrawals. With his primary accounts frozen, his digital wealth became practically inaccessible. The golden child was financially paralyzed. His tech startup was dead. The offshore accounts were toxic. The family possessed zero liquidity. They had no home to leverage. They had no credit lines left to draw upon. I sat in my warm vehicle and reviewed the stark arithmetic. I held the only legal lifeline they had left, and I had no intention of throwing it to them. I shifted my car into drive and merged onto the highway. The defensive portion of my strategy had concluded flawlessly. I returned to my downtown corporate office to prepare for the final quarter of the fiscal audit. The consequences of the asset freeze rippled through their ecosystem faster than I anticipated. I expected a phone call from a desperate defense attorney. I expected another frantic social media post denying the debt. I did not expect the physical boundary of the law to be shattered so quickly. The following morning, I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of my corporate building. I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report for a client. The flashing red light on the digital desk phone interrupted my focus. The caller ID indicated the main lobby security desk. I pressed the speaker button. The security guard spoke with a tight, urgent cadence. He informed me that an unauthorized individual had bypassed the exterior visitor checkpoints. The man was currently pacing the reception area, demanding to see me. He refused to leave the premises until he secured an audience. The guard read the name from the provided driver license. It was Richard. My father had just violated the strict terms of a judicial protective order. The flashing red light on my digital desk phone signaled a breach in the perimeter. The lobby security guard informed me that my father was currently pacing the reception area. Richard had just violated a strict judicial protective order. By legal definition, his presence in my corporate building constituted a jailable offense. I could have dialed the local precinct and watched patrol officers drag him out of the building in handcuffs. That reaction would have been swift, but it lacked strategic value. A desperate man standing in a corporate lobby possesses information. He acts on impulse, driven by fear and shrinking options. I wanted to know exactly what motivated him to risk immediate arrest. I instructed the guard to hold him there. I stood up from my desk, smoothed the lines of my tailored blazer, and walked toward the glass elevators. The descent to the ground floor took 30 seconds. The doors parted, revealing the expansive marble lobby. I stepped out and observed my father from a distance. He paced back and forth near the visitor turnstiles. The country club patriarch facade was entirely gone. He wore a wrinkled trench coat over an untucked dress shirt. My eyes lowered to his feet. During my childhood, Richard obsessed over his footwear. He imported Italian leather loafers and spent Sunday evenings polishing the material to a flawless mirror shine. The shoes he wore today were the same expensive brand, but they told a story of rapid decline. Deep scuff marks marred the toe boxes. The rich brown leather looked dry and cracked from walking through the freezing, salted parking lots of his cheap apartment complex. The pristine armor had cracked. I approached the security desk. The uniformed guard stood at attention, keeping a watchful eye on Richard. "Escort us to conference room B," I told the guard. "Remain inside by the door during the entire duration of the meeting." Richard stopped pacing when he heard my voice. He looked at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes. He did not offer a greeting. He simply followed the guard and me down the polished corridor. Conference room B featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls and deep acoustic isolation. It resembled a sterile interrogation chamber designed for corporate mergers. I sat at the head of the long, frosted glass table. I gestured for Richard to sit opposite me. The security guard stood near the glass door, resting his hands on his utility belt. Richard sank into the ergonomic mesh chair. He rested his forearms on the table. He looked small and fragile in the stark lighting. "You are violating a court order," I stated. My voice remained level and devoid of warmth. "You have 5 minutes to justify your presence before I instruct security to contact the authorities." "The money is gone, Dulcie," Richard began. His voice cracked dry and raspy. "The bank froze the remaining accounts this morning. Sylvia is packing boxes in a roach-infested apartment. We have nothing left to leverage." "You leveraged my childhood home," I reminded him. "You leveraged my forged signature. The resulting consequences belong entirely to you." Richard shook his head slowly. He rubbed his hands across his face. "You do not understand the structure. You think you unraveled the whole scheme because you found Beatrice's promissory notes and traced Julian's shell companies. You only saw the surface layer." I unzipped my leather portfolio. I withdrew my heavy red fountain pen and a legal pad. In auditing, an unsolicited confession represents the ultimate prize. You simply sit quietly and let the suspect fill the silence. "Explain the structure," I commanded. Richard leaned forward. The desperation in his eyes shifted into a cold, calculating transaction. "You always thought Julian was the golden child," Richard said. "You thought Sylvia and I blindly threw money at a failing entrepreneur because we believed in his genius. Do you honestly think your brother is smart enough to engineer a network of decentralized offshore cryptocurrency wallets?" I kept my expression neutral, but my mind raced. I had analyzed the Delaware business registries. The corporate veil was complex, woven with intricate layers of limited liability protections. I assumed Julian hired a shadowy financial consultant to build the wash cycle. "Julian is a greedy idiot," Richard stated flatly. The blunt cruelty of the assessment hung in the sterile air. "He likes luxury cars and expensive dinners. He likes playing the role of a chief executive." I needed a convincing front. I needed a washing machine. The plot twist settled over the glass table. Richard was not the tragic victim of a spoiled son. Richard was the architect. "Beatrice controlled the family trust with an iron fist," Richard explained. 10 years ago, I realized she was never going to hand over the primary capital. She treated me like an untrustworthy child. She restricted my access. But she was willing to issue commercial loans to keep up the appearance of supporting her grandchildren. He tapped his scuffed leather loafers against the carpeted floor. "I drafted those loan agreements," Richard continued. "I convinced Beatrice to fund Julian's early tech startup. But Julian never saw the bulk of that capital. I routed the funds through the Delaware entities. I converted the cash into digital assets and parked them in offshore ledgers. Julian got a percentage to live lavishly and maintain the illusion. I hoarded the rest, waiting for Beatrice to pass away so I could vanish the debt and retire." The sheer scale of his betrayal eclipsed my initial calculations. My father had spent a decade siphoning money from his own mother, using his son as a disposable shield. He funded a phantom empire while allowing me to believe they simply favored my brother. The financial preference was merely a convenient cover story for a sophisticated money laundering operation. And now the bank compliance software has frozen the pipeline, I noted. Your digital wealth is trapped behind the federal tax liens levied against Julian. Exactly, Richard said. A feverish intensity sparked in his eyes. He leaned closer across the frosted glass. He was preparing to offer the trade. I can give you the digital keys, Richard whispered. I have the ledger passwords. I know the exact routing numbers for the offshore accounts. I can hand you the entire network on a silver platter. I uncapped my red fountain pen. The brass clicked sharply. I pressed the nib against the lined paper. In exchange for what? Tear up the promissory notes, Richard demanded. Forgive the $1.2 million debt. Lift the eviction order and let your mother and me return to the Leawood house. And what about Julian? I asked. Richard did not hesitate. His response arrived cold and practiced. Julian forged the quitclaim deed, Richard stated. I will sign a sworn affidavit testifying that he executed the forgery alone. I will testify that he stole the notary stamp and utilized Vanessa to secure your signature. You hand those documents to the district attorney, and Julian takes the fall for the federal wire fraud. He goes to prison. We get the house back. You get the offshore accounts. I stopped writing. I stared at the man sitting across from me. For 32 years, Sylvia and Richard placed Julian on an impossible pedestal. They sacrificed my comfort, my boundaries, and my childhood bedroom to accommodate his endless desires. They conditioned the entire family to protect the golden child at all costs. Yet the very second the consequences threatened Richard's personal freedom and financial comfort, he offered his son to the federal government without a flinch. He was willing to send Julian to a penitentiary to buy back a comfortable retirement in the suburbs. There was no loyalty. There was no familial bond. There was only a predator trying to chew off his own limb to escape a steel trap. The profound disgust washed over me, chilling my blood. I looked down at my legal pad. I had documented the existence of the digital keys. I had recorded his verbal admission regarding the offshore routing structure. I had everything I needed to finalize the audit. I capped the red pen and slid the notebook into my portfolio. I stood up from the glass table. Richard watched my movements with sudden confusion. Do we have a deal? You came into my office to sell your only son for a piece of real estate, I said. My voice echoed against the glass walls, carrying the weight of a final verdict. You built a criminal enterprise on stolen money, and now you expect me to act as your fence? Dulcie, Richard stammered. He pushed himself out of the chair. We do not have a deal, I told him. I looked at the security guard standing by the door. Escort this man out of the building. If he returns, contact the police and press trespassing charges. You need me, Richard shouted. His voice cracked, echoing in the sterile room. You cannot access those accounts without my passwords. The government will take everything. I am an auditor, I replied, walking toward the door. I do not steal hidden money. I report it. I stepped out of the conference room, leaving him trapped behind the glass. I returned to my desk on the 14th floor. I pulled out the notes containing his detailed confession. I compiled a secure digital dossier connecting the Delaware shell companies directly to Julian's primary operating accounts. I drafted a new anonymous message to my contact within the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Unit. I attached the structural map Richard had just provided me for free. I hit send. The corporate trap was closed. It was time for the federal agents to pay a visit to Julian's rented office space downtown. I pressed the send button on my secure email client. The encrypted digital dossier vanished into the intake portal of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Unit. Federal government agencies normally operate with a notorious sluggishness regarding minor tax discrepancies. However, when a licensed auditor hands federal agents a fully verified structural blueprint of a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation, the bureaucracy accelerates with terrifying velocity. I had provided the routing numbers, the Delaware Shell Company registrations, and the detailed confession my father delivered in the conference room. I placed my cell phone face down on my mahogany desk and returned to my quarterly earnings reports. The device remained silent for exactly 3 hours. Then the screen illuminated. A text message arrived. Then a second. Then a third in rapid succession. The sender was Julian. My older brother prided himself on his immaculate presentation. He crafted his digital communication with the same arrogant precision he used to select his bespoke suits. He employed perfect grammar and punctuation to assert his intellectual superiority over the rest of the family. The messages scrolling across my screen abandoned all pretense of sophistication. "Where are you? Dad said you talked." "The office is crawling with feds. Men in windbreakers took my servers." "Feltzy, please answer me. What did you do?" The frantic, misspelled words served as the ultimate proof of his unraveling. The golden child was panicking. The spelling errors were small pebbles of chaos, signaling the total collapse of his mountain. Federal agents had raided his downtown leased workspace. They confiscated his hardware, his ledgers, and his illusion. I did not type a reply. I simply watched his empire burn through the glowing pixels on my screen. The physical destruction of their suburban facade occurred a few hours later. The Leawood Whisper Network operates on a currency of exclusive gossip and shared humiliation. By mid-afternoon, I received a video file from a former high school acquaintance who currently served on the board of the Oakwood Country Club. I opened the attachment. The footage was captured from a smartphone on the club's luxurious outdoor dining patio. Sylvia sat at a prime corner table wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized designer sunglasses. She was likely attempting to project a narrative of serene downsizing to her wealthy peers following her humiliating eviction. Julian sat across from her, looking disheveled and frantic, waving his hands in a frantic rhythm. The focus of the video shifted to the manicured valet parking circle. A heavy industrial tow truck backed into the pristine asphalt lot. The driver, a burly man wearing a neon yellow safety vest, hopped out and approached Julian's brand new Porsche Macan. The vehicle still bore the temporary dealer tags from Thanksgiving. The repo man did not care about elite suburban aesthetics. He secured the thick steel hooks under the luxury chassis. The hydraulic winch whined loudly, echoing across the quiet golf course and interrupting the gentle clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Julian sprinted from the dining patio. He waved his arms and shouted demands at the tow operator. The video captured his voice cracking as he ordered the man to release his personal property. The operator ignored him entirely, completing the mechanical lift and securing the tires. Sylvia followed her son. She stood on the edge of the valet circle, surrounded by 24 affluent onlookers. The matriarch watched the physical manifestation of her son's failure get towed down the long, winding driveway. The entire country club patio witnessed the brutal repossession. The social calculus of the neighborhood shifted in an instant. The wealthy residents of Leawood are fiercely protective of their own status. They tolerate eccentricities, but they ruthlessly excommunicate financial frauds. The community collectively connected the dots. They remembered my sudden eviction notice. They watched the luxury car repossession. They heard the incoming rumors of the downtown federal raid on Julian's startup. The tragic victim narrative Sylvia spun on social media died on that valet curb. The Whisper Network turned on her with venomous speed. They realized I was not a mentally unstable daughter abusing her fragile parents. I was a professional auditor, protecting my assets from a family of criminals. My mother became a social pariah before the waiter could even bring the luncheon check. I left my corporate office at 5 o'clock and drove back to the Leawood estate. The property felt remarkably different tonight. The oppressive weight of my parents' deception had lifted from the foundation. The grand foyer smelled of natural oak and quiet dignity. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I stood by the marble island, admiring the profound silence of my childhood home. The sharp chime of the front doorbell interrupted my solitude. I checked the security tablet mounted on the kitchen wall. The high-definition porch camera displayed Vanessa. My younger sister stood on the brick welcome mat. She wore a thick wool coat against the biting winter chill. She carried a pristine white cardboard bakery box tied with a red string. She looked nervous, shifting her weight from side to side. She was attempting another defection. She had witnessed the sinking ship and decided to swim back toward the only vessel still floating. Throughout our childhood, whenever Julian broke a valuable item or Richard lost his temper, Vanessa was deployed as the family diplomat. She always brought peace offerings to smooth over the abuse. Now she wanted to play the innocent peacemaker again, offering expensive pastries to bridge the chasm she helped dig. I set my glass down. I walked through the hallway and approached the grand entryway. The heavy mahogany door featured 2 long vertical panels of reinforced frosted glass. I did not turn the deadbolt. I did not reach for the brass handle. I stood in the foyer observing her blurry silhouette through the thick pane. Vanessa leaned closer, trying to peer inside. "Dulcie!" she called out. Her voice sounded muffled but desperate through the heavy wood. "I know you are in there. Please open the door. I brought croissants from that French bakery you love. We need to talk about what is happening to Mom and Dad." I remained motionless. I unzipped my leather portfolio resting on the console table. I reached past my red fountain pen and extracted a single sheet of paper. It was the high-resolution printed copy of the forged quitclaim deed. I stepped directly in front of the glass panel. I held the document up, pressing the printed surface flat against the reinforced window. I positioned the paper so the stolen signature faced outward toward the bright porch light. Vanessa stopped talking. Her eyes locked onto the document. The visual recognition struck her with the force of a physical blow. The false sisterly smile melted off her face. The white bakery box slipped from her trembling fingers. The cardboard hit the brick porch and burst open, scattering flaky pastries across the welcome mat. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She recognized the voided tax form signature she had stolen from my apartment desk while I boiled water for tea. She realized her quiet theft was documented, cataloged, and fully integrated into a massive federal fraud investigation. I was not a naive older sister she could manipulate with tears and baked goods. I was her primary legal threat. Vanessa pressed her hands against the cold glass. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, fogging the window pane. Her survival instinct overrode any remaining loyalty to her parents. She needed to offer me something valuable enough to spare her from a felony conspiracy charge. She needed to trade her final secret. "Listen to me!" Vanessa screamed through the thick glass. Her voice bordered on hysteria. "I did not want to do it. Dad made me take it. You have to believe me." I did not lower the document. I stood like a stone statue, watching her panic escalate into sheer terror. "Julian is leaving," she shrieked. The desperation clawed at her throat. "He drained the last emergency cash reserve an hour ago. He packed a duffel bag. He is fleeing the state tonight." The revelation hung in the freezing air between us. The golden child was abandoning his family. He was attempting to run from the Internal Revenue Service with the last fragments of stolen funds. He thought he could escape the forensic cage I built around him by simply boarding a plane. He was wrong. I lowered the forged deed and walked away from the door, leaving my sister sobbing on the porch, surrounded by ruined pastries. It was time to freeze the runway. I walked away from the reinforced frosted glass, leaving my sister sobbing on the brick porch. The heavy mahogany door muffled her frantic apologies. The foyer of the Leawood estate fell silent again. The only sound cutting through the quiet was the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing near the staircase. The heavy brass pendulum swung back and forth, measuring time in precise mechanical intervals. Julian believed he could beat the clock. He thought he could pack a canvas duffel bag, withdraw the final remnants of my parents' emergency cash reserves, and vanish across international waters. Dubai represents a notorious safe haven for white-collar criminals due to its complex extradition treaties. My brother intended to abandon his crumbling empire and leave Richard and Sylvia to face the federal consequences of his fraud. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I did not waste a single second processing Vanessa's betrayal or my brother's cowardice. I dialed Harrison Cole. The attorney answered on the first ring, despite the late evening hour. "Julian is making a run for the border," I told him. "He is heading to Kansas City International Airport tonight. He drained your client's personal accounts to fund the escape. If he crosses international lines, recovering those funds becomes a jurisdictional nightmare, Cole replied. His voice sharpened, adopting a rapid professional cadence. We need a temporary restraining order on the remaining liquid assets immediately. Execute the promissory notes, I instructed. Richard legally owes the estate over $1 million. He just allowed a fugitive to drain the collateral. File an emergency ex parte motion with the night judge. Use the active federal tax liens and the forged real estate deed as proof of imminent flight risk. Freeze every single routing number associated with the Harrell name. I'm calling the judge right now, Cole stated. The line went dead. I immediately opened my encrypted messaging application and contacted my liaison within the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Unit. I typed a concise alert detailing Julian's flight risk, his intended destination, and his estimated arrival time at the airport terminal. Federal agents despise watching their prime targets slip through the departure gates. I set the phone down on the console table and walked into the kitchen. I poured a fresh glass of sparkling water. I leaned against the marble island and waited for the invisible digital snare to pull tight around my brother's ankles. The sequence of events unfolded with brutal mechanical efficiency. I received the chronological updates through a series of secure text messages from my government contact over the next 90 minutes. Julian arrived at the international terminal sweating and dragging a heavy leather travel bag. He bypassed the standard security lines, attempting to purchase a premium first-class ticket directly at the airline counter. He requested a red-eye flight connecting through London with a final destination in the United Arab Emirates. The airline agent typed the itinerary into the computer and requested payment. Julian handed her a premium platinum credit card. It was linked directly to the last surviving joint checking account Richard and Sylvia possessed. The airline terminal screen flashed a stark red denial code. The transaction declined. Julian cursed and demanded the agent run the card a second time. He assumed it was a simple fraud alert triggered by the sudden international purchase. He pulled out his cell phone to authorize the charge. He opened his mobile banking application to clear the security hold. His screen displayed a zero balance across every single connected account. Harrison Cole had successfully reached the night court judge. The magistrate reviewed the staggering evidence of forgery, tax evasion, and imminent flight. He signed the emergency injunction. The judicial order transmitted directly to the regional banking compliance departments. The algorithms acted instantly, throwing a digital padlock onto every dollar bearing the Harrell family name. Julian stood at the ticket counter staring at a useless piece of plastic. He possessed no cash. His cryptocurrency wallets remained trapped behind the federal raid. He was entirely broke, standing in the middle of a crowded airport terminal. Before he could grab his leather duffel bag and attempt to flee the building, a team of uniformed Customs and Border Protection officers approached the counter. They were accompanied by 2 federal agents wearing plain dark windbreakers. The IRS had flagged his passport the moment they raided his downtown office. Attempting to leave the country while under an active federal criminal investigation triggered an immediate automated alert within the Transportation Security database. The agents did not offer a polite greeting. They surrounded him. They instructed him to place his hands behind his back. The golden child, the arrogant entrepreneur who believed he could outsmart the government, was handcuffed in front of hundreds of traveling strangers. The authorities confiscated his passport, his luggage, and his phone. They marched him out of the terminal toward a waiting federal vehicle. My cell phone shattered the quiet solitude of the Leawood kitchen. The caller ID displayed Sylvia's cell phone number. I stared at the glowing screen for several seconds. I knew exactly why she was calling. The bank freeze did not just isolate Julian. It blanketed the entire family structure. I swiped the green icon and accepted the call. I did not say hello. "You destroyed this family," Sylvia screamed into the receiver. Her voice sounded feral, stripped of all maternal warmth and country club refinement. "The bank just declined my debit card at the grocery store. I called the customer service line and they told me a legal hold was placed on all our funds. Julian was just arrested at the airport. He gets one phone call and he used it to tell your father he is sitting in a federal holding cell. She paused, gasping for air. "We have no money, Dulcie. We cannot even buy food. You did this to us. You tore your own flesh and blood apart over a house." I listened to her unhinged accusations. I felt no guilt. I felt no sorrow. I felt the cold, impenetrable armor of a perfectly balanced ledger. "I did not destroy this family, Mom," I replied. My tone remained chillingly calm, cutting through her hysteria like shattered glass. "The family destroyed itself. You finalized the destruction the day you packed my life into cheap, damp plastic bins to make room for a fraudster. You built an empire on lies, and now you are angry because I handed you the receipt." "You are a monster," she wept. "We are going to freeze to death in this awful apartment." "You should have taught your son how to balance a checkbook," I said. I pressed the end call button, terminating the connection. Sylvia's frantic warning about freezing to death was not a dramatic exaggeration. It was a looming, logistical reality. The emergency asset freeze carried immediate secondary consequences for my parents. They had signed a lease for a cheap budget apartment near the interstate highway. Properties in that income bracket do not tolerate missed payments. The leasing office utilized an automated clearinghouse system to pull the monthly rent directly from Richard's checking account. The first of the month was approaching in 48 hours. When the automated system attempted to withdraw the rent, it would hit the judicial freeze. The transaction would bounce. The property manager would issue an immediate 3-day pay-or-quit notice. Richard and Sylvia possessed zero liquid funds to cure the default. They could not hire a defense attorney for Julian. They could not purchase groceries. They could not pay their heating bill. The unforgiving Kansas winter was settling over the city, bringing freezing temperatures and biting winds. They were facing an imminent, brutal eviction from their last remaining shelter. They had nowhere left to run. The Leawood estate possessed a profound silence. During my childhood, the house hummed with a constant frantic energy generated by Sylvia's social climbing and Julian's endless demands. My mother used to burn heavy cinnamon vanilla candles in every room. She strategically placed the glass jars on countertops and end tables, hoping the cloying sweetness would mask the bitter tension soaking into the drywall. Today, the air inside the grand foyer smelled only of natural pine cleaner and aged oak. The artificial fragrance was gone. The quiet felt less like an absence of noise and more like a physical blanket of peace settling over the property. I stood by the large bay window in the living room and watched the harsh Kansas winter tighten its grip on the neighborhood. Frost crystallized along the edges of the glass panes. The manicured lawns across the street turned a dormant, brittle brown under the freezing temperatures. The brutal weather mirrored the harsh arithmetic closing in on my family across town. The first day of the month arrived with the cold indifference of a balanced ledger. Richard and Sylvia resided in their cramped highway apartment, relying on the illusion that they could simply weather the storm. They fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of corporate property management. Their leasing office utilized an automated clearinghouse system to draft the monthly rent directly from Richard's checking account. When the digital request hit the banking network, it collided with the judicial freeze Harrison Cole had secured. The transaction bounced, returning a stark, insufficient funds code to the landlord. Corporate landlords do not offer grace periods to tenants possessing zero liquidity. The property manager taped a rigid 3-day pay-or-quit notice to their front door the very next morning. Richard attempted to negotiate. He offered empty promises of incoming capital and delayed wire transfers. His lies held no currency. When the 72-hour window expired, the leasing company filed an immediate detainer warrant. County sheriff deputies arrived at the apartment complex on a Tuesday afternoon. They knocked on the hollow core door and ordered my parents to vacate the premises. Richard and Sylvia were forced to stuff their remaining clothing into black plastic garbage bags. They carried their meager possessions down the metal breezeway under the watchful eyes of their indifferent neighbors. With their credit scores ruined and their bank accounts paralyzed, they possessed only one remaining shelter option. They drove their aging sedan to a cheap weekly rate motel situated on the desolate outskirts of Kansas City. The establishment catered to transient laborers and desperate travelers. A flickering neon sign buzzed erratically above the cracked asphalt parking lot. Heavy commercial freight trucks roared past the building at all hours, shaking the thin walls and rattling the single-pane windows. My parents traded a multi-million-dollar suburban estate for a stained polyester bedspread and the distinct odor of stale cigarette smoke. Julian fared far worse than his enablers. The federal justice system operates on a timeline designed to crush the spirit of uncooperative defendants. Following his humiliating arrest at the International Departure Gate, the authorities transported my brother to a federal holding facility. He stood before a stern magistrate judge for his initial arraignment hearing. The prosecuting attorney read the formal indictment aloud in the crowded courtroom. The charges included multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, deliberate tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The judge reviewed the flight risk assessment, detailing his intercepted attempt to board a flight to Dubai. Bail was summarily denied. Because the Internal Revenue Service had seized his offshore digital wallets and frozen his domestic shell companies, Julian could not afford to retain a private defense attorney. The arrogant entrepreneur who used to purchase bespoke Italian suits and lease luxury sports cars was forced to accept representation from an overworked public defender. His case involved highly complex, decentralized financial tracing. The litigation discovery phase alone would require years to untangle. Julian traded his leather executive chair for a stainless steel bench in a concrete cell. He would remain incarcerated pending a trial date scheduled for the following year. Vanessa observed the spectacular collapse of her family and made a swift, calculating calculation. My younger sister survived our toxic childhood by playing the diplomat, but her primary allegiance always belonged to her own self-preservation. She recognized the sinking ship and decided to sever the anchor. Vanessa changed her cellular phone number without providing a forwarding contact. She deleted her social media profiles, erasing her digital footprint to prevent the Leawood Whisper network from associating her with the Harrell name. She did not visit Julian in the detention center. She did not deliver groceries to the cheap roadside motel. She recognized the financial contagion spreading through our parents and chose to isolate herself in her own affluent bubble. The enablers were left entirely alone to navigate the wreckage of their choices. I spent my weekend finalizing the restoration of my childhood bedroom. I had ripped away the sterile gray carpet and dismantled the corporate command center. I hired a professional contractor to sand and stain the original hardwood floorboards, returning the wood to a rich, dark walnut finish. I purchased a solid oak writing desk and positioned it near the window overlooking the frost-covered backyard. I sat at the new desk and opened my heavy navy blue binder. The meticulous files were perfectly organized. The Delaware corporate registries, the forged quitclaim deed, the digital text message confession, and the original signed promissory notes sat secure behind plastic dividers. The estate was legally impenetrable. The debts were documented with flawless precision. I had erected a fortress of receipts, and the siege was officially over. The chime of the front doorbell echoed through the quiet house. I walked down the oak staircase and opened the heavy mahogany door. Harrison Cole stood on the brick welcome mat, holding a slim leather briefcase. He wore a dark wool overcoat against the bitter wind. I invited the attorney inside. He stomped the snow from his leather shoes and stepped into the warm foyer. We walked into the kitchen and stood by the marble island. Cole opened his briefcase and retrieved a final stack of documents. "I wanted to deliver these in person," Cole said. His voice carried a tone of quiet, professional respect. "The judge signed the final closing orders this morning. The irrevocable trust is formally dissolved. The Leawood parcel is registered exclusively in your name, free and clear of any encumbrances. The legal transition is complete." I accepted the thick packet of stamped parchment. I traced the embossed county seal with my index finger. "Thank you, Harrison," I replied. "Your swift action with the night court judge prevented a disaster." Cole looked around the expansive kitchen. He noted the pristine countertops and the serene atmosphere. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud of how you handled this situation, Dulcie. She knew the storm was coming. She just needed you to hold the line." He offered a polite nod, zipped his briefcase, and walked back toward the entryway. I watched him pull his coat collar tight against the cold before stepping out the door. The afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, stretching shadows across the front lawn. I felt a sudden urge to breathe in the crisp winter air. I grabbed a thick wool shawl from the coat closet and wrapped it around my shoulders. I stepped onto the porch and walked down the long, sweeping brick driveway. The biting wind stung my cheeks, but the cold felt refreshing. I reached the end of the property line and stopped in front of the ornate metal mailbox. I pulled the small brass lever and opened the curved door. Inside the dark metal cavity sat a single white envelope. The postal carrier had delivered the daily route hours ago. The paper felt cold against my fingertips as I pulled it out. The envelope bore no return address label. It lacked a printed corporate logo or a standard billing window. I looked at the center of the paper. My name and address were handwritten in blue ink. The penmanship was shaky, uneven, and distinctively familiar. The tall, slanted letters belonged to Richard. I stood on the curb of my multi-million-dollar estate, holding a letter from a man living in a squalid roadside motel. I turned the envelope over, noting the cheap, transparent tape securing the back flap. The final chapter of the audit had arrived via standard postage. The frigid winter gale swept across the dormant lawns of the Leawood estate, carrying a bitter chill that promised an impending freeze. I stood at the edge of the wide brick driveway holding a single piece of correspondence. The thin white envelope felt brittle and cheap between my leather gloves. The cursive script spelling my name and address slanted downward in a chaotic, uneven rhythm. The handwriting belonged to Richard, but the upper left corner of the envelope remained entirely blank. He provided no return location. My father retained a pathetic, microscopic shred of his former pride, even as he descended into total destitution. He refused to document his squalid roadside motel address on the exterior of the paper. I turned my back to the street and walked up the sweeping driveway toward the warm sanctuary of my home. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut behind me, instantly severing the howling wind and sealing me inside a fortress of absolute tranquility. The grand foyer welcomed me with the quiet dignity of polished oak floors and still air. I removed my thick wool shawl, draping the fabric over the hallway coat rack. I did not rush to open the letter. Panic and manufactured urgency were currencies my family traded in for decades to force compliance. I no longer accepted their tender. I walked into the expansive kitchen and approached the espresso machine. The grinding roasted beans and the rushing steam provided a comforting mechanical soundtrack to the silent house. I poured the hot, dark liquid into a dense ceramic mug. The rich, bitter aroma filled the room, replacing the phantom scent of cinnamon vanilla that used to suffocate these walls. I carried the steaming mug and the cheap envelope upstairs, navigating the thick runner rug of the oak staircase. My newly restored bedroom offered a commanding view of the frost-covered backyard. I walked over to the solid walnut writing desk, positioned directly in front of the large bay window. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair and placed my coffee on a wooden coaster. I reached across the smooth wooden surface and retrieved a brass letter opener resting near my heavy navy blue binder. I slid the metal blade under the transparent tape securing the back flap of the envelope. The cheap paper tore with a sharp, scratching sound. I unfolded the single sheet of lined notebook paper hidden inside. The message contained no formal greeting. It launched immediately into a frantic, disorganized stream of consciousness. Richard described the freezing drafts leaking through the thin, uninsulated windows of their motel room. He detailed a chronic hacking cough Sylvia had developed over the past week, blaming the damp, moldy carpets. He complained about the roaring commercial freight trucks shaking their cheap mattress every hour of the night. He painted a grim portrait of total financial ruin and physical misery. Halfway down the page, the narrative shifted from complaint to targeted manipulation. The tone adopted a sickly sweet desperation, attempting to invoke a familial bond that never actually existed. Richard wrote about the sacred duty of bloodlines. He appealed to my sense of duty. He used the exact phrase, family loyalty to describe my supposed obligation to rescue them from the consequences of their own federal crimes. At the very bottom of the page, he presented his specific demand. He asked for a $500 loan. He claimed the funds were strictly necessary to purchase basic groceries and winter medication for my mother. He promised to repay the money as soon as Julian cleared the federal indictment and unlocked his accounts. I stared at the numerical figure written in the blue ink, $500. That specific amount triggered a vivid, visceral memory. The polished walnut desk and the sprawling Leawood estate faded from my vision. I was 20 years old again, standing in a cramped, freezing apartment near my university campus. I worked 2 grueling part-time jobs between advanced accounting lectures just to afford used textbooks and basic sustenance. My unreliable roommate had suddenly moved out without warning, leaving me entirely responsible for the monthly rent. I was exactly $500 short. If I missed the payment, the corporate landlord promised an immediate, unyielding eviction. I remembered holding a cracked cellular phone, pressing the warm plastic against my ear while shivering in a thin, worn sweater. I dialed my father, seeking emergency shelter. Richard answered the call from the clubhouse dining room of the Oakwood Country Club. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the polite, affluent laughter of his wealthy peers echoing in the background. I swallowed my pride and explained my desperate situation. I begged him for a $500 loan to cover my rent and buy groceries for the week. I promised to work extra overnight shifts at the campus library to repay him before the semester ended. Richard did not express a single ounce of paternal sympathy. He did not ask if I had enough food to survive the weekend. He sighed heavily into the receiver, acting as though my phone call was a profound, annoying inconvenience to his afternoon social calendar. He told me that Julian required a massive influx of seed capital for a new mobile application that very same day. My father informed me that bailing out my minor collegiate struggles would set a poor precedent and divert funds away from a true genius. I remember the exact phrase he used before he coldly terminated the connection. He told me to learn financial responsibility. I spent that brutal winter sleeping on a battered sofa in a friend's crowded living room. I ate donated canned goods from a local student pantry, while my older brother drove a luxury sports sedan funded entirely by my parents. The memory evaporated, bringing my focus back to the quiet warmth of my second-floor office. I looked down at the lined notebook paper resting on the desk. Society relentlessly conditions children to feel an inherent, unbreakable obligation toward their parents. The cultural narrative demands endless forgiveness and unconditional support, regardless of the psychological abuse inflicted. I searched my mind for a single trace of guilt. I checked my pulse for any lingering trauma or daughterly obligation. I found absolutely nothing. The internal landscape of my conscience resembled a perfectly balanced ledger. The emotional debt was zeroed out. The math was settled permanently. I reached across the desk and picked up my heavy red fountain pen. The brass casing felt cool and solid in my palm. I removed the cap. The metal clicked sharply in the silent room. I did not draft a polite refusal. I did not engage in a debate regarding the definition of family loyalty. I pressed the crimson nib directly against the cheap notebook paper. I dragged the bright ink across his desperate, pleading paragraphs. I wrote a single, absolute sentence in large, bold, capital letters. Denied. Learn financial responsibility. The bright red ink bled slightly into the thin paper fibers sealing the verdict. I set the fountain pen down and reached for the heavy navy blue binder. I opened the thick plastic cover. I bypassed the Delaware corporate registries, the forged quitclaim deed, and the signed promissory notes. I flipped to the very last section of the ledger. I gripped the metal rings and pulled them apart. They separated with a loud, mechanical crack. I punched 3 holes into the side of Richard's letter. I placed the paper onto the metal prongs and closed the rings shut. The snap echoed like a closing steel cell door. I did not fold the paper into a return envelope. I did not purchase a postage stamp. I would never mail the response back to that squalid roadside motel. Some messages are delivered most effectively through absolute, deafening silence. The permanent lack of a reply would serve as his final, enduring punishment. He would walk to the motel office every single morning, braving the bitter highway wind, hoping for a check that would never arrive. I closed the binder and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. I turned the brass key, locking the ledger away forever. I picked up my ceramic mug. The dark liquid was still steaming. I walked out of the office and navigated down the oak staircase. I moved through the expansive kitchen and unlocked the glass double doors leading to the back porch. I stepped out onto the wide stone patio. The biting wind had subsided, leaving behind a frigid, calm stillness. I leaned against the stone railing and looked out over the vast, rolling expanse of the estate. Delicate white flakes began to drift down from the pale gray sky. The Kansas snow fell softly, covering the dormant lawns and the bare branches of the oak trees in a pristine layer of winter white. The freezing temperature felt entirely invigorating. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the hot coffee. The rich, bitter flavor warmed my chest. My childhood home was secure. The fraudulent empire was dismantled. The architects of my erasure were destitute. I stood alone on the edge of my property, watching the snow bury the past. The forensic revenge was complete. The forensic ledger of family. The heaviest silence in the world does not belong to an empty house. It belongs to a house that has been emptied of its illusions. When the final box is packed, the forged deeds are shredded, and the front door clicks shut, what remains in the echo is never just a dispute over property, money, or real estate. It is the inescapable reckoning of how a family was built, and more importantly, how it was broken. The story of the Harrell family of federal raids, poison pills, and a daughter pushed to the absolute brink is a stark forensic audit of the modern American family. At its core, it is not merely a tale of financial revenge. It is a cautionary narrative about the profound generational consequences of our parenting values. It strips away the manicured lawns and affluent country club memberships to ask a devastating question. What happens when parents substitute conditional favoritism for genuine emotional awareness? In American culture, the traditional family structure is often idealized as a sanctuary of unwavering support. We are taught that parents are the ultimate safety net, the undeniable foundation upon which children build their lives and their futures. But there is a dark, unspoken side to this suburban dream. In the pursuit of maintaining a flawless public facade, families like Richard and Sylvia Harrell mistake enabling for love. They believed that shielding their golden child Julian from the consequences of his actions was a form of protection. Instead, they built a prison of entitlement around him. Parenting is not a popularity contest, nor is it a corporate venture where one child is the favored stock and the other is simply the insurance policy. The cardinal failure in the Harrell household was a complete abdication of fairness and honesty. By constantly clearing the path for Julian, funding his phantom startups, ignoring his deceit, and ultimately sacrificing Dulcie's childhood sanctuary to appease his ego, Richard and Sylvia did not raise a successful entrepreneur. They engineered a fragile, dependent fraud. They taught him that rules were malleable, that accountability was for other people, and that his failures would always be absorbed by someone else's sacrifice. This is the tragic paradox of the golden child syndrome. In their desperation to see Julian succeed, they robbed him of the very resilience required to survive in the real world. Long-term guidance does not mean paving a frictionless road. It means teaching a child how to walk over the sharp rocks. Emotional awareness in parenting requires the excruciating courage to let a child fall, to let them feel the stinging scrape of their own mistakes, and to guide them as they learn to stand back up on their own merit. Conversely, look at what they created in Dulcie. When a child is stripped of emotional safety and treated as a disposable asset, they learn to build their own armor. Dulcie became an auditor not just by profession, but by survival. When parents gaslight a child, rewriting history to cover up a sibling's theft, or minimizing their daughter's achievements while magnifying a son's illusions, The child learns that subjective reality cannot be trusted. They seek refuge in concrete numbers, in undeniable receipts, in the cold, unyielding truth of a balanced ledger. Dulcie's resilience is awe-inspiring, but it was forged in a furnace of profound emotional neglect. Children should not have to spend their formative years quietly gathering evidence just to prove they exist and that their boundaries matter. They should not have to become legal strategists to protect themselves from the very people who were supposed to be their guardians. The wisdom of Grandma Beatrice serves as the moral compass of this narrative. Beatrice understood that true family responsibility sometimes requires tough, unapologetic love. She saw the rot spreading through her son's values. She knew that handing Richard and Julian unearned wealth would only accelerate their moral decay. So she left behind something far more valuable than liquid cash. She left a system of accountability. She left promissory notes and irrevocable trusts. Beatrice recognized that the most profound act of love she could offer her granddaughter was the legal and financial weaponry to enforce the boundaries her parents tried to demolish. Beatrice's actions highlight a crucial lesson for modern families. Honesty must be the bedrock of the traditional family structure. We must be honest with our children about their strengths and their limitations. We must be honest with ourselves about our own parental biases. When we refuse to hold our children accountable, we do not protect them from the world. We unleash them into a society that will eventually and inevitably demand payment. And society does not forgive debts the way an enabling parent does. The federal government, the banking algorithms, and the judicial system operate without maternal warmth. They operate exactly like Dulcie, with cold, forensic clarity. As we navigate our own lives, raising families and maintaining relationships, we must ask ourselves what kind of ledgers we are writing in the hearts of our children. Are we writing entries of fairness where praise is earned and consequences are natural? Or are we cooking the books, hiding emotional debts under the rug of family loyalty until the entire structure collapses under the weight of the fraud? If you have ever felt the crushing weight of a family dynamic that demanded your silence while rewarding someone else's deceit, you are not alone. These stories exist because the pain of betrayal is universal, but so is the power of reclaiming your truth. We share these narratives to expose the shadows, to validate the receipts you have been keeping in your own mind, and to remind you that your boundaries are sacred. If this story resonated with your own journey, if you have ever had to become the auditor of your own family's illusions, please join our community. Hit the subscribe button and follow the Linda Vengeance channel. Together, we explore the intricate, often painful, but ultimately empowering stories of those who refuse to be erased. We dive deep into the psychology of family dynamics, providing a space where truth is never sacrificed for the sake of a comfortable lie. As the winter snow falls quietly over the Leawood estate, covering the manicured lawns and the empty, echoing rooms of the past, the stillness leaves us with a lingering question. A family is not defined by the blood in our veins, nor by the square footage of the homes we occupy. It is defined by the invisible ledger of how we treat each other when no one else is watching. Somewhere right now, a parent is making a choice. They are deciding whether to enforce a difficult boundary or to look the other way. They are deciding whether to demand accountability or to offer another unearned bailout. And somewhere a child is watching, learning exactly what love is supposed to look like. When the final audit of our lives is conducted, long after the noise fades and the excuses evaporate, what will the receipts say? Will they show a history of fairness, emotional awareness, and profound integrity? Or will they reveal a hollow structure, waiting for the day the truth finally knocks on the front door? The ink is already drying on the page. We just have to decide if we are willing to read it.